Welcome to Eternal Christendom, consecrated to Our Lady for the glory of our Lord. I'm Joshua Charles. So very excited today for this week of American independence, the 250th anniversary of that very auspicious day, July 4th, 1776. We are interviewing my friend Charles Coulombe. He is a French-American historian, scholar, and lecturer. He was born in Manhattan on the day JFK was elected, November 8th, 1960. And he's written widely on American history, monarchy, and Catholic tradition, among many other topics. I want to recommend his book, Puritan's Empire, great book on American history. He was educated at the ITI in Austria. ITI stands for International Theological Institute. And in his former life, he was even a comedian. And I think you'll see that in the interview. So I wanted to have Charles on this week because Charles, he's an avowed monarchist, so may not be the opinion of all of you. But he is both critical of many aspects of the American system, but also an ardent patriot. And I think that is the truly loving and I think reasonably grounded position as a Catholic. We can look at the American founding. We can see definitely some good things in it, definitely some evil things in it. But in any event, as Catholics, we are still obligated by the virtue of patriotism. And I think Charles illustrates these virtues and this balance so incredibly well. So we, as long as this conversation was, we didn't get to nearly as many things as I wanted to, because there's just so much to talk about with Charles, especially on this topic. So we love our country. We love the United States of America. And it is because we love her that we offer these thoughtful critiques of elements of her founding system, her founding mythos, and the original revolution that founded her. So we offer this as food for thought, and trust me, there will be many, many more where this came from. So without further ado, my friend, Charles Coulombe. All right, welcome, Charles. I've been wanting to have you on for a very long time. You are one of the best Catholic historians out there, an American, an avowed monarchist, and I thought you'd be the perfect guy to this 4th of July week reflect on the 250th anniversary of these United States of America. So welcome, my friend.
Thank you. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
And so before we get into things, as I told you beforehand, we like to pray to patron saints of myself and the person I'm interviewing, guardian angels and whatnot. So let's get that taken care of. We are going to ask the prayers of Blessed Charlemagne, which we've never had before with any of our interviewees, but that makes total sense. So we'll open with prayer and then we'll go get into it. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Blessed Charlemagne, pray for us. Saint Ignatius of Antioch, pray for us. Guardian angels of Charles, myself, and all the audience, guide our thoughts and pray for us. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Before we get into today's episode, I wanted to thank Eternal Christendom's patrons. You are making it possible for us to produce beautiful, substantive content that we can then share with the world for free. If you have been blessed by Eternal Christendom's content but are not yet a patron, please check out our website, eternalchristendom.com, and click Become a Patron at the top right of our homepage, where you'll find 6 ways to give, including online. We have a big vision, but we need your help to make it happen. This podcast is just the beginning, and we have many enormous and exciting projects we are actually working on at this very moment. Since we are a nonprofit and we're also under priestly authority, all your donations are tax deductible. If a relatively small number of Catholics become monthly patrons for only $10 a month, as I say, a coffee and a bagel, at least here in California, we will be on solid ground for the long game, and we can do some of these big projects precisely because so many of you have been helping and make it possible for us to plan ahead and vision cast in a big way. If you can give more than $10 a month, even better. Thank you again for your support. Now to our episode. Well, Charles, before we got into it, I had told you I wanted to read a post I saw the other day on a prominent X account. This is the X account is Fisher King, and their username is Fisher King 64. Many, many followers. I don't know who it is, but they've been a prominent kind of commentator in the political space for a while. I won't use all the words they chose to use, but it'll be clear what words they chose. So here's what he wrote the other day. He said, I hate to break it to you, but the United States is an absolute incoherent S show. The idea that we have quote-unquote representative government is ridiculous. If that were true, we would not have wasted billions killing Iranians for no reason at all. Some people wanted this, but the voters who elected this government did not. Let's go further. When Trump goes to China, he brings our quote-unquote great billionaires with him. I can't think of any more obvious symbol that we live in an oligarchy that does anything it can to manipulate outcomes, and that voting is a bit of a joke. It's like he's bringing with him, quote-unquote, the ruling elite, because that is what he did. We have at least 40 million illegal aliens living here. Our business, quote-unquote, leaders engineered this by bribing politicians to keep the border open because they wanted to pay low wages and make mucho money for themselves. When people objected because their incomes were falling, the business leaders accused them of racism and funded Barack Obama to become POTUS. The USA is $40 trillion in debt, and no one has a plan to solve that problem. Absolutely no one. This will blow up one day, and it will destroy normal people who save in dollars, because the unspoken plan is to destroy the currency and save the rich and destroy the rest. But people who own our homes, like Blackstone or BlackRock, won't care because their assets will follow inflation. Everyone else will be reduced to paupers renting from them, their bank accounts gone. The United States today is hopelessly dysfunctional. It lacks a coherent population that can even agree on anything. It is bankrupt, but the rest of the world is propping it up because they are also scared of what happens when the dollar collapses. It doesn't have any smart leaders, and we have to watch insiders doing oil trades to make money on the Iran war, and the administration itself sells S-coins. Our foreign policy is a total joke, not strategic in any way at all. It is driven by special interests and then not even followed through. And people are actually making money on it, pump and dump coming straight from the White House. This is a hell of a way to celebrate 250 years. At least we can have a cage match on the White House lawn that degrades our entire history and underscores just how bad and ridiculous things are. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Enjoy the circus. If you're lucky, you'll be dead when the music stops. So obviously a bit political, and I'm not in the political commentary business. I'll give my thoughts here and there. But, and he takes swipes at both Democrats and Republicans. So I want to cover a lot of ground with you, Charles. One, I want to know what you think of that. Second, I also want to thread the needle of, I think among Catholics, there can sometimes be this struggle. I think it's a somewhat artificial one, but I'd be very curious to hear your thoughts between patriotism and a sort of like support for the native regime, as it were, the founding regime, and how to balance that. And then also we'll get into your thoughts on the founding regime itself. So I'll shut up, and you can pursue whichever one of those you want to do first.
Well, let's start at the beginning. I've got to say that Fisher King is that's one of the most feel-good bits I've heard in a long time. I'm about ready to slit my throat. I don't know about anyone else, but
yeah.
No, I wish I could tell you he was wrong. I wish I could say he didn't know what he was talking about. It's not. It's true. There is a piece of the puzzle, though, that he leaves out and always gets left out. It's certainly true that the illegal aliens have been brought in for cheap labor. That's true. But actually, it's more than cheap labor, because there really is a labor shortage. There's a lack. You see, an economy like ours requires bodies for three reasons: to work, to pay taxes, and to consume. That, and of course, number four is actually connected to all three, and that is to support the elderly. Now, our whole system was built on the premise, and I'm going back now to FDR and the New Deal. It was built on the premise that the American population would continue to expand.
Yeah.
But we have literally murdered millions of Americans since 1972. And we've created a huge deficit in terms of people to fill those. And I'm not talking about religion. I'm not talking about morals. God forbid. Oh, no, I wouldn't touch that. But in terms of real world, now you pay you paid your ticket. Now you've taken your ride. This is where that ride has brought us, you say. I can remember back in the early 70s, just after Roe v. Wade, I was a kid. The LA Times remarked kind of slightingly how the birth rate had just dipped, and that there was a very slight chance that if this continued to 2000, we begin to lose population, native born. But of course, this was ridiculous.
Yeah.
Well, no, it wasn't ridiculous, and it's exactly what has happened. So what gets left out of all of this is that the immigrants are being brought to fulfill a necessary niche that we don't have the native born for. Now, of course, this causes other problems. We're fortunate, of course, in that most of our immigrants are Latin Americans. That is a big plus for us. If we were Europe, it'd be a little more difficult. And of course, we do have our Somalis and so forth wreaking mayhem in Minnesota and Maine from time to time.
Sure.
So it's not like we're completely, we've turned Dearborn into Michigan into an Arab settlement. I don't mind the Chaldeans. They have a lot of Chaldeans. I'm all for Chaldeans. Bring them all over.
Yeah.
That's fine.
We have some of those in our area. We've got a Melkite Catholic church and a lot of people who came from Iraq because of our invasion. There was absolute chaos and carnage after our invasion, and so now they're here, and they're delightful people, but they lost everything.
Yeah, they did, and had to start all over. But so I mention this because, again, we are paying a price that most of us went along with.
Mm.
Most people are pro-contraception. Most people are pro-abortion. We know this. We know this from the voting. All right. Forget the fact that you're given the choice of voting for scumbag A or scumbag B. In things where there is a chance to make a difference, we vote the wrong way by large majorities generally. So we deserve better. Why?
Yeah.
How?
Yeah.
How is this going to happen? That we're suddenly, we're so virtuous.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we're not. So a lot of this is the sound of the chickens coming home to roost. Now, I'm not going to tell you that we don't have the worst leadership in the world, especially because the rest of the world's leadership is pretty scummy as well.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that hit me during COVID was just how uniformly bad both the leadership in both church and state really was. My joke during COVID, was that when they had us put our masks on, they took theirs off.
Wow,
So-
ain't that the truth? Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone.
Yep.
I own you. How about that?
Yeah.
Well, so you look at that, and yeah, it's pretty daunting. But you can't really expect different.
Mm-hmm.
If you plant dandelion seeds, don't expect oak trees to grow up. See, because you get dandelions. Plant acorns, don't expect dandelions.
Yeah.
I don't know how many cliches I can cram in here. Garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
I mean, what are you expecting?
Yeah.
What are you expecting? So, on the one hand, I would have to say that I can't really disagree with Fisher King's very Grail-esque name, but I can't disagree with his reading of the situation. But I can't say that the situation is unwarranted or that it's unjust. Why should we, if we have shown ourselves as a people to be the children of Mammon, why shouldn't we be ruled by scum? What's wrong with toads being in charge?
No, it's a fantastic point, and it's a sobering one. And I think from the bit I've seen from him, I think he would agree with you. He's not Catholic, but he's often expressed a lot of respect for Christianity in general and the Catholic Church in particular, although he's definitely had his criticisms, but some of his criticisms you and I would agree with. So I guess what I'm kind of really wanting to dive into, especially today, is, it's kind of a perennial, one could argue even pedestrian question at this point, but is how much where we are today is a result of how we began. And in many ways, I actually would find it more interesting, I think, for the audience as well, for you to just help us analyze how we began just on its own terms, not even because the future can go in a million directions all the time, at least from a human perspective.
No.
And so,
And that,
yeah.
that too. I would want to add one other important thing. When you're looking at analyses, plural, like Fisher King has given us, it was something you've always got to remember before you're ready to slit your throat or jump out the window. I could jump out the window, but it's on the bottom floor, so I look pretty stupid doing it. It wouldn't hurt, though. So, I mean, I could do it constantly and be fine. But no, the thing you got to remember is that we descend from people who lived through the Black Plague.
Mm.
All right? The DNA in your flesh and in mine is from people who saw a half to 2/3 to 4/5 of their neighbors die in front of them like that.
Yeah.
And yet, you know what? They pulled themselves together and they created a life. And we know they did this because if they hadn't, you and I wouldn't be having this conversation.
Yeah.
Despite the old joke of it being hereditary in my family to have no children. The truth is, that is slow burn, that one, you caught it. But no, the truth is that we all descend from people who survived things far worse than we're ever likely to see. So before you want to throw in the towel and just say, oh my God, it's so awful, how can it stop?
Sure.
Stop. You descend from survivors. And if you try to, you worship the God they worshiped and you do what they did, then somehow or other, you and or some of your kids will make it through. So,
Amen. Amen.
Be calm. And at the end of the day, what matters is not whether or not the system we live under survives, because many a system has come and gone, and usually when they collapse, it's not pretty. But lots of people survive these collapses, and they keep the whole thing going on. Above and beyond all of that, there's still the steady traffic of people leaving this place for heaven and purgatory and hell. And that ultimately is what we have to remember. Each of us are born at the time we're put in, because this is the best time for us to save our souls, and God knew that from all eternity.
Yeah.
My father was the first one ever to say that to me. And then when he did, he sighed and said, of course, it doesn't speak very well for you and me that this is the best time for us to save our souls.
Yeah, no, exactly. No, I agree entirely with you. It makes me think of the Tolkien line in Lord of the Rings about, we can't choose the time we're born into, just how to use the time. I don't remember the exact wording, but yeah, no, I agree. It's funny. I'm somebody who feel like I can perceive how truly disturbing things are, and yet, fortunately, I'm not somebody who loses my joy or my peace over it. But I do think, in a sense, I have more joy and peace from having an accurate realization of where we are, as opposed to, yeah.
If you put your hope in something that's going to disappoint you, you'll be disappointed. It's really that simple. And I'm afraid that there are very few human institutions, even the church, that won't disappoint you one way or the other. But if you accept that and you deal with that, and you say, okay, well, just waiting for the other shoe to drop, then you manage. But to answer your first question as to where do we get here from there and so forth, actually, we can't really stop the story with 1776, because there was a lot that went before that and determined pretty much where we would end up. And there's a lot more around it. We tend to forget that the American Revolution didn't simply cause the start of the United States. It brought several other countries into being. Anglo-Canada, the Bahamas, Sierra Leone, and in a lot of ways, the current British system comes out of the American Revolution. So, Sir Keir Starmer, in his way, is as much a product of the revolution as Donald Trump or Joe Biden.
Wow. That's a statement.
Yeah, it is. It is a statement. But I'll explain it.
Yeah. Love to hear it.
I should probably just dump it out there, leave it floating.
No, I love it. I love it. It's a thought that never occurred to me, but it's fascinating, and that's why you're here. I want to hear about it.
All right. Well, in a nutshell, let's go back. we have to go back really to the beginning. And the beginning is 1492. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. And that was when Europe westward, thanks to the Portuguese, had already began pushing eastward. But this was when, as it was then, Catholic Europe began breaking its bonds and eventually spreading over the entire planet. This is a phenomenon unlike any other in history. If you take the totality of the European countries together and you look at everything, all the places they colonized, all the things they did, amazing thing, just an astonishing record. Then, you know, we're not supposed to think about it, or if we do, it was just so awful, I could just spit. Yeah, you will, go spit. The fact is, if you want to be decolonized, stop speaking a colonial language, stop using this colonial technology, stop eating colonial food, using colonial medicine, and basically sit in the mud and eat grubs. And then you'll be decolonized. Lucky you.
Yeah.
If you're not willing to do that, though, and you talk about decolonization, you're a hypocrite. Just so you know. Anyway, I'm not saying hypocrisy is bad. I would never condemn something I myself. Never mind. Anyway, so moving along. So the thing is, unfortunately for us, Europe's explosion to the outer world occurred just as the medieval synthesis, you might say, was breaking down, and with the Protestant Revolt, which had the effect of exporting, rather than a sort of semi-unified missionary effort, it exported the religious strife all over the planet. So, I mean, the Portuguese, I mentioned, they evangelized India, Malaya, Thailand, the Indies, and then the Dutch followed within 100 years to try to drive them out of all those places and replace them with the Dutch reform. This is a story you don't think about, you don't hear about, but it was all linked to our story because back in, obviously the first European settlement in the United States was St. Augustine, Florida, 1567. You could call Philip II really our first founding father, given that St. Augustine was founded under him. The first French settlement was Sault Ste. Marie up in Michigan. But if you want to look, and because we are speaking English, and most of our institutions and all the rest of it came from that funny little island, we have to admit we're part of the Anglosphere. So in a very real sense, our story begins not with Plymouth Rock, but in 1607 with Jamestown. The interesting thing about Jamestown, what we know now, we didn't know 30 years ago. There were Catholics at Jamestown. So even our very beginning, you had the strife between Catholic and Protestant. Mind you, they were crypto-Catholics. They didn't make their faith known. The only reason why we know it now is that we've dug them up and we found their rosaries and relics.
Oh, interesting.
It's kind of a giveaway.
Interesting. I didn't know that. Fascinating.
Yeah. So the whole, over the course of the next several years under the House of Stuart, Virginia, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, North and South Carolina, Maryland, of course, the great Catholic refuge, 1632. All of these colonies were founded, and they all imported the British system and adopted in various ways for their local government, for just about everything. One of the big differences, of course, was that except for Rhode Island, which had no established church, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and New Hampshire were Congregationalists, Calvinists. But the southern colonies, the Carolinas, Virginia, eventually Maryland, they were Anglican. And that would play a big part in our revolution eventually. So the Protestant revolt in England, of course, had been very messy. And as I say, to a degree, it was exported here. Or, well, not here, I'm in Austria, but to the United States.
Sure.
But what had happened, and this is very, very key to understanding both British and American history. When Henry VIII broke with Rome and gave out his monastic lands that he had stolen to his friends, he didn't realize this, but he was creating a class that would in time come to dominate England.
Mm.
He was creating an oligarchy. And it's not a coinkydink that his major partner in destroying the monasteries, Thomas Cromwell, was the great uncle of Oliver Cromwell,
mm-hmm.
who was the man who murdered Charles I. And as the great French Catholic theologian Bossuet put it, in a sense, the blood of Charles I atoned for the rebellion of Henry VIII.
Mm.
And of course, Charles I was very much involved in the American colonies. Again, like Philip II, like Louis XIII and XIV, you could count the Stuart kings amongst our founding fathers as well.
Sure.
But so they've developed all of this, and each of these colonies was caught up in what was going on at home. So the what used to be called the English Civil War, and now they call the much more poetic and much more Tolkien-esque Wars of the Three Kingdoms.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. It sounds a lot better, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
The Wars of the Three Kingdoms.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the last battle of the Wars of the Three Kingdoms was fought not in England, not in Scotland, not in Ireland, in Maryland.
Hmm.
The Battle of Severn Creek, 1652, when Cromwell's men at last reduced both Maryland and Virginia to his obedience. They didn't have any trouble with New England.
Mm.
There wasn't getting kind of an issue there.
Because the Puritans had already gotten there.
Believe me, they were signed on before a ship came from London.
Yeah.
So they were all happy when they heard the king had been murdered and all that. They were neat people in their own special way. So there you have the period that everyone's under Cromwell. He dies. His son is a nebbish. A year goes by. They bring the king back, Charles II. We've got the Restoration, and the Restoration is as big a deal in the colonies as it is at home.
Hmm.
Gosh, I can't think of his name right now, but the fellow who'd been chased out by Cromwell's men as governor of Virginia was brought back in some triumph as governor once more. And that's where it gets its name, the Old Dominion.
Yes.
It comes from that time.
Okay, got it.
And so all of our panoply of offices, our counties, our sheriffs, everything we get from that time.
Mm.
To give you an example, I have to admit this kind of thing that fascinates me in history. You know your notary public, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure you've met several in your day.
Sure.
Well, it seems like, you don't think much about the notary public. But the history of the office is amazing.
Hmm.
Because originally, in both civil law, the Roman law, and our own Anglo-Saxon law, the notary had a particular place. It's much bigger in continental law, by the way. And even in Louisiana, where you still have the civil law is still very much Code Napoleon and not our civil law. Notaries in Louisiana have to be much more heavily trained than the rest of the country.
Interesting.
Because it's just like in Europe, in Latin America. The notary is a very important figure because he doesn't just witness contracts. He reads them. He has to make sure he vets them.
Oh, wow.
To make sure that they're equitable.
Wow.
And he has to call the attention to of one or the other of both sides. There's a little problem here.
Yeah.
That's because he's not going to give the witness of the state until he's absolutely sure it's equitable.
Sure.
So it requires a certain amount of legal training. That's a very important thing.
Yeah.
In civil code jurisdictions, which for us is just Louisiana. But the rest of the country, they're like the British notaries public, just witnesses. But either way, the notary arose in medieval Europe. And in the beginning, they had to be authorized by either the Pope or the Holy Roman Emperor.
Oh, really? Wow.
Well,
wow.
Yeah. But of course, there got to be more and more of them. And, you need more notaries. So the Pope deputed his power to each of the primates of the different countries of Europe. So if you were a French notary, you'd go to the Archbishop of Reims, Spanish notary, Archbishop of Toledo, etc. In England, the Archbishop of Canterbury. All right, Protestant revolt. Church of England is created, but the notaries public in England, from then until now, are registered by the Archbishop of Canterbury.
Really? Wow.
Yep.
Fascinating.
But, as with so many other things, the British colonized the 13 colonies, but they have no bishop on our side. Well, what do? Well, a lot of the Archbishop of Canterbury's powers, especially in the civil area, again, a survival from Catholic days, those powers were deputed to the colonial governor. But the governor, of course, had other things to do than worry about, you guessed it, notaries public.
Yeah.
So who does he dump it on? The secretary of the colony, which is a particular job, a particular post. You have independence. But the secretary of the colony becomes the secretary of state in each of the states. And who's responsible for notaries public today? Secretary of State of each of the states.
Yeah. Wow.
That comes to us all the way down.
From the Pope.
Now, multiply that by just about anything you can imagine.
Yeah.
Sheriffs, coroners, juries, they've all got this wild history.
Yeah.
That takes us all the way back to medieval times.
Wow. That's fat. I did not know that. So when I've been going to the Notary Public my whole life, I've been dealing with an office that came originally from the papacy.
Exactly. Or the Holy Roman Emperor. Depending.
Or a whole, yeah, that's a wild thought. That's a wild thought.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's like our electoral.
Could you give a little background, if you think it's important? So for people who don't know much about Oliver Cromwell and how it's related to the American Revolution, Puritanism, I mean, I think I don't know a ton about Cromwell. I know he was a fanatic, and I know he made Christmas legal. And our family is a Christmas family. We love Christmas. So when I discovered
he made mince pies. He made mince pies illegal for fear people might be celebrating Christmas with them.
Wow. Yeah. So the most Protestant of the Protestant guys made Christmas illegal, and I just don't think many are aware of that. And so what was this? No. What was I've always wondered. And again, if you think this is connected to the whole American question, it sounds like you do. Like why or maybe you do. Did the English Revolution, the War of the Three Kingdoms, as you say, the Civil War, I've never seen it as bad as the French Revolution, as bloody, but perhaps it was.
It was.
I know the king was killed,
horrible.
So there's a commonality there, but.
Oh, there were a lot more people killed than that.
Yeah.
And Ireland was devastated. Cromwell just went after the Irish like you wouldn't believe.
Yeah.
And actually, the Scots didn't do too well under him either. I mean, the biggest difference was that in England and Scotland, you had large groups of people who were pro-Cromwell. In Ireland, you didn't really. So when they won, they just butchered. Drogheda was a town where Cromwell just massacred people right and left. He was a monster.
Yeah.
Utter monster. And it was the same in England and Scotland to a lesser degree. And there's a reason all the Catholics fought for the king. You know, and people forget that. Why do you think they did that? There's a reason. Now, of course, it didn't hurt that his wife was Catholic.
Yeah.
It didn't hurt that he negotiated with Rome for a union. It didn't hurt that he wanted to re-Catholicize the Church of England.
Yeah.
None of those things hurt.
Yeah.
But the truth of the matter is that had Charles I been able to accomplish what he set out to do, the whole story would have been a very different one. But he didn't. And so we got Cromwell. And Cromwell, the worthless butcher, and I mean that in the nicest possible sense, as Dame Edna Everidge would say, this is going to sound so cruel, and I feel very badly about that because I do mean it in the best sense possible. Anyway,
yeah.
No, the sad truth of the matter is that the Puritans in New England, in a lot of ways, were the ideological active ingredient in the United States, and have been ever since, for a number of reasons. But I mean, that's why we think of the Pilgrim Fathers, and we don't think of the Fathers of Jamestown. We just don't.
Mm.
You know, we don't celebrate them at all. We celebrate the founding of Plymouth Rock.
Yeah.
So, which really doesn't make a lot of sense until you realize that that is the element of the American foundation which came to prevail. And once you realize that, then it makes a lot of sense. Especially, well, we'll get to that. So, moving along.
Sure.
In my running narrative.
Sure.
So Charles II becomes king. Then the Carolinas are founded in Pennsylvania. New York is conquered. It's named New York from New Netherland and New Amsterdam because of the king's brother, James II, who was the Duke of York at this time, and the reorganizer of the Royal Navy, who really, in a lot of ways, made it possible for the English to win that war that resulted in the conquest of the New Netherlands. Anyway, so Charles II is fairly adept at playing the oligarchy, who is still there. I mean, they've really summoned him back, to be honest. But he's adept at playing the game of appearing to be as supreme as his father ever was, and yet really having to defer to those masters of the state. His brother was not that good at it. James II converted to Catholicism before he became king, as did his wife, Mary Hyde, but then she died. Their two daughters, Mary and Anne. Mary was married to his nephew, William of Orange, the stadtholder of the Netherlands. Anne was married to the Prince of Denmark. They both stayed Protestant when their parents converted. And then he married again an Italian princess, Mary of Modena. Now, as long as it looked as though the succession was in Protestant hands, the oligarchy could take what James was dishing out. But once it became apparent that there was going to be a Catholic succession, i.e. when his son was born by his second wife, that was the signal for the so-called Glorious Revolution.
And before we get into that, could you explain a little bit more? You've used the term oligarchy a little bit, and you connected it to Henry VIII and his despoiling of the monasteries. Could you give us a little bit more background on like who this oligarchy was?
Of course.
Yeah.
Sure. They were the major landholders. They were the folk who counted. They were the people that owned most of the seats in Parliament.
Mm.
They were the people who mattered. And again, it's not like it was a deep, dark conspiracy. See, one of the things that is very difficult, especially for modern Americans to understand, is that human societies tend to function broadly along the same lines, no matter what the labels are, no matter what the names are.
Yeah.
You have the rulers and you have the ruled. The rulers will always be a minority. The ruled will always be the majority. That's just the way it is.
Yeah.
There will always be a state church. That is to say, an animating principle. It may not be religious. You know, in the Soviet days, it was there is no God and Lenin is his prophet.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
But nevertheless,
yeah,
there will be a state church that defines reality, that gives legitimacy to the people in charge, gives them their authority. Every state has that. Now, the problem with us is that we live our lives pretending that neither of those things are true.
Yep.
We believe, that everyone is equal and that somehow it all matters. And we also believe that we live in a confessionally neutral state.
Yeah.
Well, we don't. There is no such thing. There can't be. You know, people ask me, is there anything wrong with separation of church and state? Well, no, there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with the tooth fairy either. You know, she's fine as far as I'm concerned. I have nothing against her. Only problem is she doesn't exist. If that's a problem. I mean, I don't want to discriminate against the non-existent.
Yeah.
But I'd be the last one to go on record attacking the non-existent. Yeah. You know, I've been voting my whole life. anyway.
This is why he was a comedian in his
is,
former life, people. This is why he was a So,
well, it gives me, people ask me, you feel the way you do, why do you vote? I said, because it gives you a right to laugh.
Yeah. Yeah, well said. Well said.
But at any rate, no, so the thing is, there is no such thing as separation of church and state. My church may be separate from the state. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But there will be something, an animating principle that fulfills the role of a state church. It'll be a body of ideas of some kind. With ours, it's very vague. But like every state church, it punishes heresy. Don't think it doesn't.
Yeah.
And that, I have a friend here who was he's a theologian. He was attacked for defending the 10th's defense of the churches dealing with heresy.
Mm-hmm.
And I told him, I said, Father, I wouldn't have gone about it the way you did, which was a straightforward defense of truth. But see, when you're dealing with people who don't understand truth or don't believe in it or don't care, that's the worst way to do, because you might as well speak Sanskrit to them for all it matters.
Sure.
You have to zero in on them and push them into the light. So what I would have said I to him, I would have said, look, every society punishes heresy. We all agree that's a good thing. And as soon as, of course, people look at you when you say that, they say, well, it's illegal to deny the historicity of the Holocaust.
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to say that's wrong?
Yeah.
Are you going to say that?
Yeah.
Well, then if you are, it's a very brave stand.
Sure. Oh, I'm not glad, but yeah, you're right. Every regime has its truths that expects you to affirm.
Of course they do.
Yeah.
The question is not, will we punish heretics? The question is, what is heresy in this society?
Yes.
That's the issue.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's like, are you for censorship? Depends on what's being censored and who's doing the censoring. The thing itself is a tool. You might as well say, am I in favor of cups?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, they don't have holes in them. But if they do, I'm against them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyhow, so the oligarchy then were the great landholders, most of them, not all of them, because of course you had some of them who were committed to the old way of looking at things. I mean, it was, for instance, the church survived in England and Scotland and Ireland, thanks to great landholders. But all of the political things happen at that level.
Meaning landlords who happen to be Catholic and obtain the lands from monasteries and had the priests do private mass. Is that what you were talking about?
Not just them. I mean, most of them weren't Catholic. You did have some Catholics in that position, but most Catholic gentry and nobility had always, they just sat where they'd always been.
Yeah.
And they weren't going to change.
Yeah.
Now, some of them, there were some, I think, Lord Petrie, I could be wrong. So if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But at any rate, there were several prominent English Catholic families who had monastic lands, but they were a small minority of the totality. So these were the fellows who were basically, a chunk of them became Puritan before Cromwell, when it was you might say when it was a good career move, and then kind of got disenchanted with Puritanism when it was running the country and banning everything fun.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
they kind of lost their interest. Hence the compromise that brought back Charles II. And that compromise was, we'll let you play at being king so long as you don't push us.
Sure.
James II comes in, his brother dies. And he can't play that game. But they're willing to tolerate him so long as he's got female Protestants to succeed him.
Yeah. Yep.
But when it becomes apparent that he's going to be succeeded by a male Catholic, and that this isn't going away anytime soon, they were not going to have that. So you had first the so-called Glorious Revolution, and this, you've read, I know very deeply, Jefferson.
Yeah.
If you read, oh heavens, I've gone blank. The man who was the main apologist for the so-called Glorious Revolution. Yes, John Locke. Yeah. If Jefferson had written the Declaration of Independence as an academic paper, they'd have dinged him for plagiarism from Locke.
Yeah.
And in truth, as William Cobbett points out in his History of the Reformation in England and Ireland, there is an organic connection between the so-called Glorious Revolution and our revolution. Very important to remember. Same arguments. Difference, of course, being that James II aspired to be king as his fathers were. George III was much, much more modest.
Yeah.
But we'll get to him.
Yeah, sure.
We'll get to him. So he's overthrown, James II. His people in Scotland fight for him, Bonnie Dundee and all that, and they're killed.
Yeah.
And then in Ireland, Patrick Sarsfield, and the Battle of the Boyne, and the Siege of Limerick. And then the wild geese go off to Europe. And then they settle down for a period of peace punctuated by world wars.
Well, and just so, because I know a lot of the audience will not be familiar with the details like you and I are, so just give a brief explanation of what the Glorious Revolution was in 1688. Like, what exactly happened so people understand the significance of this?
Well, what happened basically was that the king, James II, had proclaimed an edict of toleration, which gave Catholics and non-Anglican Protestants equal rights with Anglicans. Mm. Parliament didn't like that idea, so Parliament refused to accept it. The king refused to withdraw it. So a group of the magnates of the country invited his son-in-law, William of Orange, to come over from the Netherlands and become King of England.
So what was this like? What was this actually like as far as like the event of it? Like was I've always, because I haven't dived into this very much. Like, was James II just sitting in London, and all of a sudden there's this upstart from the Netherlands that shows up, and he is like physically threatened, and he has to just leave? I mean, how did this actually happen?
Well, that's exactly what happens. The Dutchman lands. His forward forces are defeated at the Battle of Reading by Patrick Sarsfield, who loom later in Ireland. But then the Duke of Marlborough goes over to him and takes the whole army with him. Mm. Well, William loses his army, so he doesn't have anything to fight with, and he flees to France after throwing the Great Seal into the Thames. Mm. So Parliament declares that he has abdicated by virtue of having left, and they install William and Mary as joint sovereigns. And that's how that happened.
And then parliamentary sovereignty. So now there's not. Aha. Yeah.
There's a price to be paid for William and Mary, and the price is parliamentary sovereignty. From now on, until this very day, Parliament is sovereign, not the king.
Even though the king, the queen before, they're called the sovereign, even though they're called that.
They're called the sovereign. They keep all of the... See, one of the interesting differences between Catholic and Protestant cultures is that Protestants are very adept at keeping the form, even though the substance can be completely different.
Yes.
Whereas Catholics can't do that. I mean, when Catholics turn against even the truth, they have to get rid of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You see, you could not settle, if you're a reasonable person and you're not a Catholic, and you look at what happened to the Catholic Church after Vatican II, you might look at that, if you were a Jew or an Episcopalian, and say, well, can't you settle for everybody doing their own thing? I've had Jewish people say, can't you like Reform, Orthodox, Conservative?
Sure.
Or if you're Anglican, can't you do high church, low church, broad church? No, you can't.
Yeah.
You can't do it. No, it's not happening. No. I'm right.
Yeah.
So, there's a good side and a bad side to that. Of course, like censorship, like going after heresy, a lot depends on the specifics. That kind of absolutism is good when it's a tool. It's good when it's oriented toward a good end. It's bad when it's oriented toward a bad end. The French and Spanish, the French Revolution, the Spanish Civil War, were indeed horrible compared to the so-called Glorious Revolution and to our own, although our own was no picnic. But that's because in Protestant countries, people will compromise. Catholic. And those civil wars are generally to the death.
So you're saying that Protestants are, in the political and religious sphere, are better at a form of transubstantiation, where the accidents are maintained, but the substance beneath it has changed. Is that what you're saying, Charles?
Well,
have you ever heard that comparison be made?
That.
That's what occurred to me when you were describing it, that the external forms are maintained, but the underlying substance has changed.
You actually could, or of course my dad. See, when I was a kid in the 60s, they were looking for different words to get rid of transubstantiation. And they were talking about transsignification,
sure,
trans this and then trans that. So my dad, in response, declared that the real miracle was transfinancialization.
Okay.
You see, what happens is you put the money in the collection plate, and the exterior remains the same, but the money goes from being yours to the priests.
Yeah.
Transfinancialization.
Yeah.
You see, it's a miracle.
There we go.
But no, to give you an example of what I mean, I'm trying to pull something up online here.
Sure.
There is in the British Parliament, the House of Lords, every day that the House of Lords are in session, they say this prayer. And this prayer is amazing to me because it is the entirety of Catholic social teaching as it was. Listen to this. Almighty God, by whom alone kings reign and princes decree justice, and from whom alone cometh all counsel, wisdom, and understanding. We, thine unworthy servants, here gathered together in thy name, do most humbly beseech thee to send down thy heavenly wisdom from above, to direct and guide us in all our consultations, and grant that, we having thy fear always before our eyes, and laying aside all private interests, prejudices, and partial affections, the result of all our counsels may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety, honor, and happiness of the king, the public wealth, peace, and tranquility of the realm, and the uniting and knitting together of the hearts of all persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity, one toward another, through Jesus Christ our Lord and Savior. Amen.
Wow.
Wow, indeed. Wow, indeed.
Yeah, the UK is weird. Every time I'm there, I feel... I love visiting, but I feel a palpable tension between ancient and modern, Catholic and non-Catholic. You just the churches. And I remember being in, not to get too far afield really quick, but I think it'd be interesting to reflect on with you. I visited, obviously not England, but the Bayeux Cathedral, which if I'm not incorrect, William the Conqueror built, after the conquest. And I remember I was there in 2017, I believe, my last year of law school. I was still Protestant. And there was almost nobody there, and the Bayeux Tapestry was nearby, so that was neat to see, although quite pornographic in a few places, I must say. I didn't realize it was pornographic in a few places. But it was an odd feeling, and it was a feeling of being both perfectly at home and totally alien at the same time. You know what I mean? It felt like this.
I do.
This is where I'm from. Like this civilization, whatever it was that created this cathedral, feels very like mine, and yet it's not real anymore, in a way. And that's how I feel around the UK whenever I'm there.
What I tell people is that if you're an American of Catholic views and so on, Europe is very much like Sleeping Beauty's castle.
Yeah.
You wonder, whose cheek do I have to kiss? What sword from what stone do I have to pull? What challenge do I have to bellow to wake this thing up? But there are reasons for that too. I would just say in parentheses you got to remember a couple of things. One is, if you look at the European people, to include those of us over the sea in the Americas and Australia and New Zealand and South Africa and even our quote unquote half caste cousins, the Anglo Indians and people like that. We split into two, really, between the 16 and 1900s during that period. Those of us who didn't fit in, had the get up and go, thought we had a better idea, sometimes correctly, sometimes not. A lot of weird ideas that people tried to put into practice in the wilderness.
Sure.
Salem and call your office.
Yeah.
But you had any number of bizarre notions of saints trying to build perfection in the wilderness, and not just in the Americas either. But at any rate,
building Jerusalem in England's green lands. Yeah.
Or in Ohio.
Yeah.
Or in Southwest Africa.
Yeah.
But you have all of these people going out, and they created cultures that were very big on action, big on doing things. They had to be full of drive. Not always that much into thought, but certainly into action. And I don't mean they were stupid, not by any means, but contemplation and reflection didn't come easily because you were too busy trying to stay alive. Meanwhile, back home, the people who fit in, people who are getting along, people having a nice day, they stayed. And then were traumatized by 2 world wars. So we're on the other side of all of that. And now you have the Europeans divided into us too. For us, when we go over there, or over here, yes, it's home. And yes, it feels like a tomb or like Sleeping Beauty's castle. For them, when they come to see us, and not just in the United States, but throughout the colonial world, what drive, what energy. They're always amazed. I think it was Archduke Franz Ferdinand, when he was in America in the 1890s. He came to the Columbian Exposition in Chicago, but he went all over the United States. But that was the big thing there. He said the American reflects his landscape, capable of greatness and grandeur on the one hand, and grotesqueness on the other. But he will believe anything that's advertised.
Yeah. And
I have to say, of all the comments by European travelers on the United States, he really got it.
Yeah. Well, who was it that said the only authentic form of American art is advertising or marketing or something to that effect?
Well, there's a lot of truth to it. I mean, if you think of the golden age of American illustration, how much of that were ads?
Yeah.
Now, mind you, a good piece of it were books. You had people like N.C. Wyeth and so on.
Sure.
But an awful lot of our, from 1865 to, say, 1950 or 1960, even, the golden age of illustration, how much of that was for ads? Tons of it. And they were beautiful ads.
Sure.
They really were.
Sure.
And that, well, I'll get to that because it actually has a point in my story. So we'll set that aside.
Okay.
Moving along. So anyway, we touched on the Glorious Revolution. And so from that time to this, Parliament is sovereign. Parliament decides who should be king. The forms are gone through. But on one level, they're meaningless. I say on one level because they do have a certain psychological impact, which to a great degree almost takes the place of the church because it gives them a sense of transcendence. But unfortunately, when Henry VIII broke the sacredness of the church, the sacredness of the crown couldn't be far behind, and it wasn't. All right. Well, then you've got William of Orange and his lady established on the throne, and then you have the beginning of a series of world wars. First, William of Orange and the Dutch and the Austrians, oddly enough, allied against the French and the Prussians. And the French, this is the beginning. It's in 1685, I think, 1689 or something. Anyway, whatever it was, the War of the Grand Alliance was the first of them. And in our country, it was called King William's War.
Mm-hmm.
Then the second one, the War of Spanish Succession, we call it Queen Anne's War. Then you had the War of Austrian Succession, we call it King George's War. Then you've got a flip in the alliances. And France and Austria finally ally, the two major Catholic powers, and Britain and Prussia ally, the two major Protestant powers. And then, thanks to George Washington, we have another war, the 7 Years' War. He was the man who started it.
I didn't realize that.
And that's interesting. Yeah.
Huh.
Well, it's an interesting thing because all those other wars had begun in Europe for European reasons. The 7 Years' War began in America. And it began because the French and the British both claimed the Ohio country. So a young militia colonel, or captain even at that point, named George Washington, was leading a party of Virginia militia and their Shawnee allies. And they came upon a party of French surveyors. They took them prisoner. And then the Indians tortured and killed the leader of the French party, Jumonville, in a place called today Jumonville Glen in Ohio. And they were under the command of the young George Washington. So the French were not best pleased with this. And in the end, it led to a declaration of war. And that was the first of these. Now, when I say these were world wars, they were fought in the Americas, all over the Americas. They were fought on the high seas. They were fought in Africa. They were fought in India. They were fought in Europe. These were world wars.
Yeah.
It was slow motion by our standards. It was slow motion.
Yeah.
But it's important to bear this in mind because we were an integral part of all of that. We're not used to looking at our history as part of everybody else's, but it is. So what happens? Well, several things. Meanwhile, back at home, William dies. Mary died first. Then William, he had confiscated a horse from a Jacobite. The Jacobites were the supporters of the Stuarts.
Yeah. James II. Yeah.
James, Jacobus, exactly. Yeah. And then James II's son, the little kid whose birth, he was James III. And he would eventually end up in exile in Rome and die in 1766. His older son, Bonnie Prince Charlie, led the famous rising of 1745-46 in Scotland and in England. And then his younger brother, Henry IX, he would have been Cardinal York. He became a priest and then a cardinal, died in 1807. That was the end of the main line of the House of Stuart. But anyway, William of Orange's horse steps in a molehole and throws him. So ever after, the Jacobites toasted the wee gentleman in black velvet, meaning the mole who made the hole that caused William to break his neck. Anyway, a little grisly, but So he dies, and he's succeeded by his sister-in-law, Queen Anne. Queen Anne is the last British monarch to preside over cabinet meetings. She's the last one to veto anything. And when she dies in 1714, there's a real problem. The Tories had been in power for a while, and they were actually quasi-Jacobite. Had they still been in power when she died, there was a really good chance they would have brought her brother over, James III. But the government fell before she died.
Okay.
So the Whigs were in power, and they brought over the Elector of Hanover, George I. He didn't speak any English.
So this is how we get the English-German odd mixture going on. Yeah.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Precisely right. So George I doesn't speak English. Cabinet meetings, he doesn't understand what's going on. He could care less. He's happy to be king, but doesn't mean anything to him, other than a source of income for his main possessions as he was concerned at Hanover.
Did he come to England?
Son, George, oh, yeah.
He did?
Sure, he sure did. And he went through the motions. I mean, he read the speech from the throne. He had no idea what it meant, but he didn't care. He did what he was supposed to. There's a very funny story about the first time he stepped out on the terrace at Whitehall Palace, and the mob was booing him. And he said, my peoples, they have come for all your goods." And somebody roared back at him, "Aye, and our chattels too."
Yeah. Yeah.
So
what an odd reality. So correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, this oligarchy is essentially bringing in foreigners to maintain Protestantism. Is that a fair summary?
To maintain Protestantism and to maintain their order.
Yeah. Now,
bear in mind the opposition. You look at who the Jacobites were. It's fascinating because the Jacobites tended to be people, from the Celtic fringe, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, Cornwall, the north and the west of England. Now, mind you, there were always exceptions. Remember, with civil wars, including our own revolution, there are always exceptions to every one of these sorts of rules. So, yeah, there were pro-Hanoverian Irishmen.
Sure.
Yeah. Just like there were Jacobite people in Norfolk.
Yeah.
In the belly of the beast, you might say. But good enough for government work and these sorts of rules. But you'll always find exceptions, especially in a civil war, because there are a lot of different things that empty into them from other elements. It's like during the Protestant Revolt in England, you could see the shadow of the Wars of the Roses.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of Henry VIII's supporters, not all, but they were the descendants of some of the stalwarts of the Lancastrian cause.
Mm.
A lot of the recusant people were bits and pieces left over from the Yorkist cause.
Mm.
But it's not a direct thing.
Sure.
You can't say, the Yorkists were for the faith and the Lancastrians were against it. It's never quite that.
Not that simplistic. Yeah. Yeah.
No, it's always blurry. But those are different. I mean, if we had a civil war today in our country, which God forbid, the reasons people choose sides are extremely varied.
Mm-hmm.
And they're often not ideological. They're sometimes geographical. And I'll touch on that in a second with regard to our revolution.
Yeah.
They're sometimes religious, ethnic. It's a question of who I went to school with, even. My best friend at school is a general in the other army.
Yeah.
Well, I might go join the other army because he's there, or we might end up on opposite sides and finding ourselves looking across the table at the peace treaty.
Yeah. It's sad. Things like that are very sad to me. I mean, it's interesting because, as you say, people aren't always acting according to these grand narratives or purposes. Sometimes it can be that simple of who their nearest of kin is, and they want to remain close with them. But also in some of these wars, kindred going up against one another. It's very sad.
Exactly.
It's very sad.
Civil wars are the worst.
Yeah.
And wars of any kind are no fun, but the Civil War is the worst. Anyway, so
can I ask you a quick question before we move on?
Yes, of course.
Why
Sure.
was parliamentary sovereignty not established after the murder of Charles I? Why would it have been 1688 as opposed to 1640, whatever it was, when Charles was murdered, if I'm getting that date correct?
1649 he was murdered, and then the Restoration came in 1660.
Yeah.
And it's because you had Cromwell. I mean, he just abolished the monarchy.
No, I know he abolished the monarchy, but why wouldn't that itself be a moment for the establishment? I mean, it didn't stick. Maybe that's the reason why. It just didn't stick. There was the Restoration. Okay.
It didn't stick. And by the time Charles II came back, the people were so disgusted with Parliament, who had brought all this garbage on them.
Yeah.
Parliamentary sovereignty? You've got to be kidding. Those people that have brought us to this, you couldn't trust them to handle a bowl of soup, let alone a country.
Yeah.
It's madness. So there wasn't the push for it.
So 1688 just happened to stick.
It happened to stick for several reasons. One of them being that in that in the interlude, the country becomes somewhat more centralized. So control of government. I mean, remember, all the while this is happening, it's not a vacuum. The modern state is growing. Things are becoming ever more linked, ever more centralized. The power of the state per se is growing. I mean, in the Middle Ages, the power of the state was minimal. There wasn't much there.
Yeah.
You just didn't have it.
Yeah.
If you had a bad king, he wasn't a tyrant because he didn't have the means to be one. He could make life unpleasant for the people around him. But everybody else would just go like that. Sure. What you had was anarchy.
Yeah.
When you had a bad king. A good king was like an orchestra leader because power was very diffuse. Authority was concentrated in the king and the church, but power was diffuse. So a good king in the medieval manner of doing things had to be able to coordinate these folks and get them all somehow on the same page without blowing his own horn too much. With us, of course, today it's the opposite. With us, power is concentrated and authority is diffuse.
Yeah.
Amongst the electorate. So it, mutatis mutandis, King Charles III doesn't really have that much more power, or that much less power than his medieval predecessors. Because they presided over a state that was virtually non-existent.
Yeah.
Whereas he's the prisoner of a state that you can't escape.
Yeah.
So but at least he shares that with his subjects, so that's something. They've got that in common.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's nothing wrong with being slaves of your masters. Anyway, I move on. So, as I was saying,
one more question there. Do you think, just a quick little sidestep of speculation, do you think Charles, there's a part of me that thinks he wants to become Eastern Orthodox or something other than the head of the Church of England if he could? Do you think that?
I very much so think that.
Yeah.
I mean, recently a letter that he wrote, albeit 30 years ago, came to light, wherein he basically attacked all the churches except Eastern Orthodoxy for giving in to political correctness.
Yeah. Interesting.
His now, mind you, his having the Patriarch of Jerusalem co-consecrate the chrism with which he was anointed means that this is the first time since 1685 that we've seen a king of Great Britain anointed with a chrism that we Catholics would consider valid. Interesting. Now, mind you, it was put on him by a man we would consider a layman in funny clothes.
Sure.
But of course, he's lucky that it happened when it did, because today it would be a lay chick.
Yeah. No, I was going to say, at least it wasn't the lay woman in funny clothes. Goodness me. Yeah. Well,
I hate to say this, but I predicted that Sir Keir would appoint a chick.
Yeah.
And sure enough, it did.
Yeah.
I never thought I could dislike any prime minister more than I disliked Tony Blair. But boy, Sir Keir Starmer, KCB, PC, KB, KCM. Gosh.
Yeah.
What a piece of garbage. And I mean that in the nicest
possible way. Yeah.
A living, breathing piece of refuse.
Yeah.
But I mean that nicely. Yeah. It's a compliment, really. Well, no, I'm not judging. I'm accepting what he's made himself.
Yeah.
Every time I see that face, I want to throw something. But
fair enough.
Well, I'm sure that'll get me doxxed or something, canceled, or whatever it is, because you know how it is over there. You can slit throats, and that's fine.
Yes.
But don't you make a bad joke online?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
As they say, Sir Keir has declared that there's no assault on freedom of speech in Britain, and anyone who says so is going to prison.
Yeah. No, it's a very, very weird time. Please excuse the brief interruption, everyone. We just wanted to give you a quick reminder to check out the Eternal Christendom bookstore, where you can find great deals from great apostolates for both books and coffee, including the Christ the King roast that we developed with our friends at Imperium Coffee. These deals will not only save you money, but some of them provide Eternal Christendom a cut of the sale, so you'll be helping us too. Head to our homepage, eternalchristendom.com, and click bookstore near the top right to check it out. All right, we have completed our brief coffee break. I think we had closed with Queen Anne and George the First. I think you'd made a passing reference to the final Jacobite uprising in the 1740s. So where are we now, Charles, as far as getting to America?
We're literally all over the map.
We are.
That's where we are.
But very necessary stuff. Very necessary stuff.
It is. And, the funny thing, I was just last month, or the month before last, in Scotland. And I went to Culloden, where my 9 times great-grandfather, Laughlin MacKinnon, stood with Bonnie Prince Charlie. And I found out how he survived the battle, because I stood where he would have stood on the left flank. I could see exactly where he would have gone to get away.
Wow.
And I thought, gosh, if he'd been in the central part, the center line, or in the right flank, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Yeah.
But he hightailed it, and in 1772, he and his wife came from the Isle of Egg to Prince Edward Island, and then to Quebec. The daughter married a French Canadian, and the rest you see before you.
Yeah.
But that's true of everybody.
Yes.
That's why genealogy, is really very, very important, because, and this is why the study of history is so important, because it's why you and I are sitting where we're sitting.
Yeah.
And the most of us, we don't know these things, you see. We don't know where we came from. And today, with things like Ancestry.com and all that, not that that's a plug, neither is it product placement, but there's no excuse not to find out where you're from and who you are, because you're part of the great story.
Yeah.
Whoever you are. Anyhow.
Well, and if I could just offer one reflection off that, it's always striking. Here we are, but these incredibly thin threads by which we got here sometimes, and how easily it could have been so radically different, like with the situation with your great whatever grandfather. It's fascinating. It's humbling. It makes you feel like you have an inheritance to understand and pass on in some way.
When you do, you are the sum of a whole bunch of people who lived and died, and for the most part are forgotten.
Yeah.
Except now you can remember them, up to a point anyway.
Yeah.
The other thing to remember too is that as long as you strive to be the kind of man you should be, or the kind of woman if you're a woman. Yeah, that's right. I don't want to get the trans people upset with me. But as long as you're trying that, you give a meaning to their lives. You give a point to their lives. Canary Tekakwitha, came from untold generations of pagans who, especially given that they were not a pleasant variety, quite likely, went down to the eternal coal fields. But her being her gave a meaning and a purpose to all those lives.
Yeah.
So even if you descend from nothing but rakes and horrors and drunks and hookers, you're doing something with your life. You're being something.
Yeah.
Gives meaning to their lives. Because without them, you wouldn't be here.
Well, the greatest of all men in history had murderers and hookers in his family tree, his family line, and it was our Lord Jesus Christ. So
exactly.
So he
exactly.
yeah.
A Davidic family reunion might not have been that much fun.
No.
But we'll leave that alone.
Yeah.
But no, it's quite true. It's quite true. So anyway, so we're in the 1740s. George II he speaks English, but not well. And it's during this period, George I and George II, that the prime ministry arises as we know it.
As an office.
Because the king, as an office. and as the effective head of the government.
Yeah.
Because the king is just along for the ride. But a couple of things happen. One is, in 1759, my ancestors are defeated by yours at the Plains of Abraham. No, I'm not bitter. And then the following year, George II dies, George III becomes king. Now, this is pivotal. Why? Well, as George III says in his first speech, I am the first in my line to glory in the name of Britain.
Mm-hmm.
He was the first member of the House of Hanover whose first language was English. He was very much interested in several things. He did not want to go back to 1688, which is what it was, but he certainly wanted to go back to Queen Anne.
When you say he didn't want to go back to it, what do you mean?
What I mean is he didn't want to overturn
Got it.
the act of succession.
Got it.
He didn't want to get rid of parliamentary supremacy. What he did want was the same role in governance, the same ombudsman role that Queen Anne tried to occupy.
Yeah.
And that the two Georges could not. Incidentally, this is apropos of nothing, but, when Queen Anne died, all of the judges in the colonies went into black. You may notice that we don't have the colorful, except the Court of Appeals in Maryland. No American jurisdiction has the colorful judicial robes that the British and the Commonwealth countries have. There's a reason for that. It's because in 1714, Queen Anne died, and the colonial judiciaries all went into mourning.
Huh.
Unlike the ones at home, they never came out.
Ah, interesting.
And so they've worn black robes ever since in the United States. And I remember when I was in high school, some judge somewhere found this little bit of factoid out. He started wearing a claret-colored robe, and he said, I'm sure Queen Anne was a wonderful lady. We all miss her. I'm as broken up as anyone. But at some point, we have to come out of mourning.
Yeah, that is. It's another one of those like notary public stories. Wow, yeah, I didn't know that. Fascinating.
It is, and for that matter, one of the good things to know about Queen Anne is that with the Catholics in Maryland, they have a special connection with her because when King James was overthrown, Lord Baltimore lost control of Maryland. He was still Catholic. I think it was the third or fourth Lord Baltimore. They took Maryland away from him. He kept his property there, but he lost control of the colony. It became a royal colony.
Mm-hmm.
And it would remain one until his son or grandson apostatized, and then he got control of Maryland back. But as soon as that happened, the colonial legislature in Annapolis began, named after Queen Anne, incidentally, began whittling away at the Catholic position. And then finally, they passed a set of laws that would reduce us to where we were in the rest of the British Empire outside Pennsylvania. That is to say, the penal laws. The Catholics of Maryland appealed directly to Queen Anne, and she vetoed it.
What was that? She what?
She vetoed the bill.
She vetoed it. Okay.
She vetoed the bill. She refused the royal assent. And so she would be the last one to do it with the British Parliament as well. So, having refused the royal assent, it did not become law in the colony of Maryland, and the Catholics were able to continue, which is why Charles Carroll of Carrollton had money.
Yeah.
You remember him?
Yeah.
If it weren't for Queen Anne, he'd have been a pauper.
The only Catholic signer of the Declaration of Independence, just for those who don't know. Yeah.
That's the one. And the cousin of John Carroll, who was the first Catholic Bishop of Baltimore.
Yeah.
Actually, first any Bishop of Baltimore.
Yeah.
So So the Maryland Catholics called her Good Queen Anne after that. Anyway, so George III becomes king in 1760. He immediately has several issues.
Sorry, you said 1716. I think you meant 1759 or something.
60.
60. Sorry, no, my bad. My bad. Okay.
Yeah, 60.
Okay.
60.
I was like,
1760.
Okay. My dates are way off.
Not 16.
Yeah.
Yeah, he wasn't born yet, but he became king.
Well, it's like our Lord, you know. No, I'm just kidding.
It's like the AI thing that reported that I'd been married in 1955.
Oh, God.
And that was neat, given that I was born in 1960. So I arrived pre-married.
Yeah, that's funny. Arrived pre-married. That's funny.
Yeah.
Okay, so 1760. My bad.
So 1760, George III becomes king. One of the things he's interested in is Catholic emancipation. So what happens? Well, he begins visiting Catholic nobility, which they had not done. He becomes popular in Ireland, and he appoints the Lord Lieutenant to Ireland, the Duke of Rutland, who was very popular. The first Lord Lieutenant of Ireland to be popular since 1688. And, things of that nature. Well, then, 1763, they signed the peace treaty with France. And now he's got a little bit of a problem because the treaty requires him to treat his newly acquired Indian and French subjects as though they were his own born. Now, that's a problem. Because remember, for the colonials, the image of the king was as their protector against the evil Catholic French in the north and the evil Catholic Spanish in the south. Now, he's obligated to protect Catholics. So how does he do this? The first thing he does is he signs off on General Haldeman temporarily, provisionally, ending the penal laws in Quebec. They were never really applied.
And what did the penal laws do? Just so people have a little bit of background on that when you say that.
They make it technically illegal to be a priest.
Okay.
They make it illegal for a Catholic to own a great deal of property.
Okay.
They make it illegal for a Catholic to vote. They make it illegal for a Catholic to go to university. They make it illegal for a Catholic to go above a certain grade in school.
Yeah.
Those are the penal laws.
Yeah.
The free system of English laws in a neighboring province, as they were described by Thomas Jefferson.
Yes.
In the Declaration of Independence.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Was that a... Anyway.
Yeah.
I had to get that nasty little thing in there, didn't you? Man, you couldn't just let that swipe go by.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I couldn't. Anyway.
Yeah. No, I want to dig into it when we get to that. Yeah.
We shall.
Yeah.
So what should happen? But then the Bishop of Quebec dies. And the Vicar General has been elected bishop by the chapter, certified by Rome. But how do we get him consecrated a bishop? Well, against the advice of his government, George III tells Brion to go to France to get consecrated. And that was George III's doing, directly. Eventually, he would become responsible for the first Catholic Emancipation Act in 1778.
After we're already fighting.
Well, we'll get there.
In
America.
Yeah.
The fighting had already begun. But in 1774, he puts through the Quebec Act. Now, one thing it's important to bear in mind is that from 1760 to 1770, the king has no control over the government at all. He tries initially appointing a prime minister he likes, Lord Bute, but there's chaos. Parliament, they won't take him. So Bute's out of a job, and they put in a Whig. Now, there's another problem facing these guys. The problem is that the British government had run up a ton of debt over the 7 Years' War.
Yeah.
Now, the British taxpayer was supposed to pay for all of that, although it had been primarily done on behalf of the colonies. The colonies weren't paying anything. So what government after government tried to come up with was a way whereby the colonies would pay a symbolic amount. Nobody thought they were ever going to get anything like real money out of them.
Sure.
But meanwhile, let's go back to the colonies. I mentioned the oligarchy in England, the Whig oligarchy. They would be as much George III's opponents in Britain as they had been of James II or anyone else.
Mm.
But in the colonies, every colony had its own little oligarchy. But it varied according to the nature of the colony. So, in New England, the big magnates were in shipping and things like that, and commerce. And they were Congregationalists, Calvinists. You had Anglicans, but they were generally converts and lower class, middle lower class people. In the South, the Anglican Church was established, and the great magnates were the planters. And they were almost all Anglican. The thing was that every one of these colonies was run by an assembly, and that assembly was dominated by the local oligarchy. Who were the four wealthiest men of the colonies in 1776? George Washington, John Hancock, Philip Schuyler, and our old friend Charles Carroll of Carrollton.
Yeah. So Ben Franklin didn't make it to the top four.
No, not for want of trying.
Okay.
Not for want of trying. He speculated in land. And that was one of the things he was annoyed about, because it wasn't just the Quebec Act that was problematic. Another thing that happened, remember what I said about the Indian subjects? Well, this obligated the king to protect the Indian lands, because now they were as much as subjects as the people on the seacoast.
Mm.
And the result of that was the Proclamation of 1763, which meant that there could not be, without negotiation between the Crown and the Indians, there could not be white settlement west of the Allegheny.
Yeah.
Beyond the Indian lands. Well, an awful lot of people, including Ben Franklin, had planned to get very rich after the war on land speculation. All of a sudden, that gets cut off, and they're not what you would call best pleased. The other thing you should bear in mind is that the vast majority of taxes that anybody paid in those days were paid to the assembly. And the assembly was dominated by the wealthy men of the colony.
Yeah.
Not by the king.
Yeah.
The vast majority of white men could not vote for it. So they were being taxed without representation.
Mm.
You might say those who spoke the most about taxation without representation were those who were the most skilled at practicing it.
Fair enough.
They knew what they were talking about.
Yeah.
They knew. Boy, oh, did they know.
Yeah.
So the well, if you know something inside out, you know what's to be said.
Yeah.
So at any rate, listen, if you want a home security system designed, get a burglar.
Yeah. They'll tell you how to make it impervious.
Exactly.
Impregnable, yeah.
Just don't give them any of the codes.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't give them any of the codes. But at any rate, so everyone is sitting looking at each other. You have various of their governments attempting to come up with means of dealing with this problem. So you have things like the Stamp Act. You've got you have what seemed like a real smart idea. That was the tea tax.
Yeah.
About which more momentarily. But in 1770, something very important happens. What happens is that George III is finally able to appoint a prime minister to his liking, Lord North. Now, Lord North inherits all these problems. Now, before, during the Stamp Act and times like this, an interesting thing occurred, and that was that a number of the people who objected to the Stamp Act and all that, who tended, oddly enough, to be closely connected to the real masters of each colony, appealed to the king to rule them directly, like the Stuarts. Now, if he had wanted to, he felt he couldn't. He was bound by his oath to go through Parliament and go through the government. But this was interesting.
Yeah.
Because in terms of later propaganda, they would attack the king, while knowing full well that the king was not responsible for most of the measures that they were complaining about.
Yes.
Why? Because if they had attacked Parliament, John Locke's arguments would have collapsed.
Yeah. Yep.
And so it was
the whole ideology of the Glorious Revolution. They would have been attacking that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that was why they had to kind of switch gears. But where the king ironically helped them was the Quebec Act. Because then they could point to him as the defender of Catholicism. Now, mind you, 4 years later, they would have to do a just kidding routine, jazz hands to try to get the French and Spanish on their side.
Yeah.
So, but at that moment, the anti-Catholic card was what was really what they were going for.
Which made it into the Declaration of Independence. Just so, I mean, most Americans, we've only read the opening few lines, right? But if you actually read the whole document, the Quebec Act, I don't think by name, but it's referred to as one of the grievances.
They attacked the king for having suspended the free system of English laws, meaning the penal laws, in a neighboring province. Now, that is the one attack on the king that is actually accurate, because he really was the main author of the Quebec Act. So, you know what, Mr. Jefferson? But because my ancestors benefited from it, and I'm Catholic today, partly because of it.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, I slipped.
Fair enough.
But then the Continental Congress had gathered, and they wrote two letters, which were very interesting. One was to the people of Britain, and the other was to the people of Canada. Now, the one to the people of Canada appealed to my ancestors, saying, surely, despite the difference in our religions, we have a shared love of liberty. Together, we will be able to blah, 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 blah. Meanwhile, the letter to the people of Britain attacked the king for establishing in Quebec that religion, and I quote, which has bathed your islands in blood. Beautiful turn of phrase. Now, unfortunately for them, Bishop Briand, you remember the guy who was able to go to France because of King George?
Yeah.
He got copies of both letters. So, what happens? Well, the Continental Congress dispatched two men to Canada to try to convince the French Canadians to come over to them. One is Ben Franklin. And the other is Father John Carroll of Maryland. So the two of them get up there. And, well, it doesn't go very well. Bishop Briand forbids any of his priests to put them up and suspends the one who did. He excommunicates John Carroll. Now, this is a local excommunication.
Sure.
It only applies to the Archdiocese of Quebec. But for those of you who are wondering, not that people do, for those of you who are, when he became Archbishop of Baltimore, he had to go to England to get consecrated, even though there was a bishop much closer in Quebec. But you see, the excommunication was still in force.
Yeah.
So he couldn't go there. There's little factoids.
Yeah.
It was only Cardinal Ouellet, about 15 years ago, who lifted it posthumously.
Oh, wow.
So if they ever want to bring Carroll's relics to Quebec, they can do it now. It's fine. It's not a problem.
Sure.
Take care of it. But at any rate, so this is where the story gets really bizarre indeed, because they go back. The fighting starts in
Carroll and Franklin go back. You mean?
Yeah. They go back to with empty hands. The war begins on Lexington Green, as we know. The purging of the Tories, the Loyalists, had actually begun 2 and 3 years before. And this is where it gets really intriguing, who the Loyalists were. This is interesting. And again, as I said before with other civil wars, I'm going to give you some patterns, but they're not, like I'll tell you that most Congregationalists in New England were rebel, especially the clergy, right? But there were several very prominent Congregationalist ministers, Mather Byles in Boston, and I forget his name, but the minister in Deerfield, Mass. They were Loyalists. So, I mean, so everything I'm going to tell you now, you'll find exceptions, just so you know.
Sure.
But basically, Loyalists tended, to be members of minorities. So in New England, Anglicans tended to be Loyalist. The the Congregationalists tended to be rebel. In the South, Anglicans tended to be rebel, but Presbyterians tended to be loyalist.
Hmm.
Now you think, wait a minute, the Congregationalists are Calvinists, Presbyterians are Calvinists. Well, see, it's not cut and dried. It was the haves versus the have-nots.
Hmm.
Similarly, in New York, amongst the Dutch, the more assimilated a Dutchman was, the more he spoke English rather than Dutch, the likelier he was to be a rebel.
Hmm.
The less assimilated, the likelier to be loyalist. With the Catholics, the wealthier he was, the likelier to be a rebel. The poorer, the likelier to be a loyalist.
Hmm.
And interestingly enough, one of my favorite little stories in that era, in 1772, Sir William Johnson, who was the Indian agent for the Crown with the Iroquois and tribes west, he was also the biggest landholder in the Mohawk Valley and a chunk of New York State. The province of New York.
Yeah.
So he imported several hundred Scottish Catholic Highlanders to work his lands, and with them their parish priest, an Irishman named Father John McKenna. Well, they arrive in New York, and they're greeted with, wait a minute, you're Catholic immigrants. Catholicism is illegal in this province. And Sir William had gone down to meet them, and he told the customs people, no, you misunderstand. I'm Sir William Johnson. But this is, no. Again, you don't seem to catch on. I'm Sir William Johnson. Mouth closed. You go away now.
Yeah.
And up the Hudson, up the Mohawk. So they settle, and there they live more or less peacefully for 3 or 4 years. Father McKenna offering the Mass and doing everything that was illegal in the province of New York at that time. When, in 1776, Sir William had died by this time and was replaced by his son, Sir Guy, who, Sir John was the cousin. Anyway, Sir John and Sir Guy Johnson were there. Anyhow, the winter of 1776, their neighbors drive them out of their homes, and they have to make the long march up to Montreal.
Winter of 1776, after the Declaration or before?
Yeah.
After. Okay.
4th of July is in the summer.
Yeah. Well, just meaning if it was January or February of 76, or if it was November, December.
No.
Yeah. Okay.
No, it was after the Declaration. Okay. But they drove them out of their homes, and they had to take the long march to Montreal in the winter. And they lost a lot of their women and children and old people, which did not improve their tempers.
Yeah.
So they get up to Montreal, and they organize as a couple of regiments, the Royal Yorkers and the Royal Highland Emigrants. And Father John McKenna becomes the first Catholic chaplain in the British Army since James II.
Wow.
And then they go back down to visit their old neighbors. It's not pretty.
Yeah.
But they were not happy people. So that's the ethnic side. There's also a geographical side. Areas that were sort of neglected, left out, South Jersey, the North Carolina, South Carolina upcountry, the Virginia upcountry, West Virginia. Those areas and other spots scattered around the colonies, basically places that were ignored by the colonial governments. Again, bearing in mind these were self-governing colonies. They tend to be loyalist for kind of obvious reasons. The people bring them the revolution were the people who already ran their lives. And as far as they were concerned, you come to me and you say, I've got a glorious crusade. You can have your sons die for it and pay up too.
Yeah.
No, I don't want to do that. But what's funny about those areas, flash forward 80 years to the next Civil War, those areas, if they were in the North, tended to be Copperhead. And if they were in the South, they tended to be Unionist. But again, the same reason. Those people are already running them into the ground, have this wonderful crusade that they can die and get bankrupt on. And they, I don't think I like that very much.
Yeah.
Traitor. So these are all, again, these are not questions of ideology. They're questions of practicality.
Yeah.
what is your, because it was a civil war. And even John Adams, who was hardly what you would call a British propagandist, will tell you that it was a third and a third and a third. A third for independence, a third against it, and a third neutral, which is not a democratic thing at all.
No.
So, the long and the short of it, the new government is helped by an important factoid, and that is that Sir William Howe, the British commander in the beginning,
new government in Britain?
No, the new government in the United States.
Oh, so you're talking post? Which government are you referring to?
Ours. The Stars and Stripes.
Got it. Okay, just making sure.
The red, white, and blue.
All right.
That's the Union Jack, too.
Sure.
Anyway, never mind. So, no, but so the new government have all sorts of problems. But they have one major ally, Sir William Howe. 3 times he let Washington's army escape.
Yeah, British general.
3 times.
Yeah,
and he did that on purpose. And when he retired and went back to Britain, he took up his seat in the opposition as an MP, which he already was. And there was a Parliamentary Board of Inquiry asking him, why'd you let Washington get away 3 times? And his response was classic. The answer to that question is political, and I choose not to give it. So without Sir William, the revolution would have ended rather quickly. But he did one other big thing, and that is he basically, in 1778, London came up with what seemed to be a foolproof plan. Burgoyne would come down the old Conqueror's Road from Montreal. Clinton would go up. They'd meet in Albany, and then St. Leger would come along the Mohawk Valley and meet them there. And that would cut New England off with any luck and the war. Didn't work that way. It didn't work that way because Clinton went down to Philadelphia. And that left Burgoyne at Saratoga.
Yeah.
Which brought in the French and eventually the Spanish. Now, this was the gift that kept on giving. Because that very year was the year that George III brought in the first Emancipation Act in England. Caused the Gordon riots, too, because a lot of people didn't like that idea, but there it is.
Emancipation for Catholics.
The entrance,
just so we're clear.
But exactly.
Yeah.
So that the most galling things were gotten rid of.
Yeah.
Priests were no longer illegal. You could own property. All that. You still couldn't vote. You still couldn't sit in Parliament. You still couldn't go to university. But you could complete secondary school.
Okay.
There was all sorts of the really nasty stuff they got rid of.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, that was the year that France and then Spain the following year came into the war. George III felt betrayed by his brother monarchs. And that was the end of his interest in Catholic emancipation. Right then, right there. It also didn't do the kings of France and Spain much good. The King of France was one of my favorite people, actually, Louis XVI. Nevertheless, he had, in the 4 years he'd been king, till the end of the war in 1778, he brought in a great many reforms. Now, one of the things you'll see in those world wars I was talking about earlier, each of them featured the French fighting very well, but running out of money and being unable to continue the war. In those 4 years, he had brought in sufficient government and military reforms that they were actually able to fight the thing to the finish. But they were still bankrupt. So, 4 years after that, 5 years, you have a big volcanic eruption in Iceland, kills a lot of the French crops. You have the Great Hunger. And whereas before he would have opened the royal granaries or used credit to buy grain for the starving, there was no money. All spent on America.
Yeah.
And believe me, we didn't give them anything in return.
Yeah.
So for the French, the American Revolution was a net loss. And for the Spanish, it ended up blowing them out of their empire in Latin America, ultimately. But they didn't know that at the time. Otherwise, I think they would have done things a little differently.
Sure.
Anyway, But then, isn't that true of all of us? If you look back in your own life, you'll
Of
see
course.
things might have done differently.
Yeah.
So, at any rate, now the France and Spain enter the war, and eventually a ton of other countries in Europe, the League of the Armed Neutrality, threatened to come in. We have the Battle of Yorktown in 1781. That's because of that, Lord North's government falls. George III's attempt at constitutional reform in Britain is destroyed, which is, of course, what Sir William Howe was hoping for and his allies. So they got what they wanted.
What would the core of that constitutional reform have been?
A return to the status quo under Queen Anne.
Okay, where the monarch has
would have been
a
say, and also he was interested in trying to regularize colonial administration. I mean, people have been since the Congress of Albany in 1754, which Ben Franklin had a thing or two to do with.
Yeah,
there had been various ideas floated to unite the colonies into a more sensible arrangement. In fact, one of the most reasonable ones was done by a Loyalist, Joseph Galloway, who had started out as a Whig, but when the Declaration of Independence came along, he wouldn't go along with it, so he jumped. But there were a number of people like that who were Whigs up until the Declaration, and then said, well, you know, taking an oath to the king, we can't do that. But the long and the short of it is that when all of that was finished, the king was basically a prisoner of his Whig government and would remain that way. And more or less, it's been that way ever since.
Yeah.
I mean, a few years later, the Founding Fathers, having seen what chaos was ensuing under the Articles of Confederation, gathered Philadelphia, they produced the Constitution. And interestingly enough, they steal the idea of the Electoral College from the Holy Roman Empire.
Yeah.
And they create this machinery, which we lived under ever since, more or less. And one of the, I think it was Eric Nelson wrote a book called The Royalist Revolution.
Yeah.
You know the book?
I do. Yeah, it's in my library.
There's a great line in it toward the end. It said, when, I'm misquoting, but it's basically what it's saying is that when the commotion of the revolution and the Constitution were over, on one side of the water you would have a monarchy without a king, and on the other a king without a monarchy.
That's a very good line. Wow. Yeah, I remember having some email exchanges with Eric Nelson a number of years ago. He had written another book on, it was something like the Hebraic Republic or something like that. It was something along those lines about in biblical roots or something to that effect. So in the time we have left, I would be curious for you to help us analyze. Well, I mean, again, we're at the 250th. So we've had this long narrative of facts, like help bring it together for us narratively and also, you know, thematically. And also, I'm curious what you think of just the revolutionary arguments. Do you think, what do you think of the argument of the Declaration or arguments? What do you think of the supposed principles that were articulated to rebel? Do you think it was a justified revolution or rebellion? Are such things possible in Catholic theology? Just these sorts of questions I'd be very, very curious to get your input on.
Well, sure. There are three things for a rebellion in Catholic theology. For a rebellion to be just, you need three things. One, the faith has to be threatened. Two, the doing nothing has to be worse than letting loose the horrors of war.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's got to be that level of horror. And lastly, there has to be an objective likelihood of winning. In other words, if you're just doing a beau geste, don't waste your time.
Yeah.
So how does the revolution apply to this? Bearing in mind that the founders had a totally different frame of reference, and that the notion of the Catholic Church's views of a just revolution would mean nothing to these guys.
Sure.
Zippo. I mean, they could have they couldn't have cared less. But firstly, was the faith being threatened? No. Quite the contrary. The faith being protected and extended was part of the problem they had. 2, would doing nothing have been worse than the war? No. They weren't going to lose anything. Except when you declare yourself treasonous. Well, yeah, then you opened up a problem.
Sure.
But prior to that, if you don't indulge in treason, you have nothing to worry about.
Yeah.
Now, to be fair to John Hancock, and I try to be fair, and I didn't even touch on the tea tax. I really need to because it's an important thing.
Sure.
The tea tax was not quite what people think of it as. Basically, in the year of our Lord, 1774, the East India Company was about to go bankrupt. Now, this presented the British government and the king with a huge problem, because if it did, they would have to run India. And they had neither the resources nor the desire to do that. So how do we prop up the East India Company? What we do is we don't tax their tea, the colonists.
Mm.
There's a nominal tax, but it gets swallowed up. It's meaningless. It's not taxed in anything but a formal sense. Nobody pays any real money for it. That tea, because it isn't actually taxed, will be cheaper than the smuggled tea that people like John Hancock bring.
Mm.
And here we have a problem. John Hancock's fortune is built on smuggling tea.
Mm.
So you have this cheap tea coming in. It's cheaper. I mean, some people did pay full price for tea, but most people didn't. They bought smuggled tea from people like John Hancock.
Yeah.
You have this cheap East India tea come in. It'll be the end of them. So it's got to be stopped. And voila, it is.
Mm.
In that sense, there was a threat. I mean, if you're a smuggler.
Sorry, you broke up a little bit. You broke up a little bit. Can you
fight for
the
your
last
income.
10 seconds or so? Can you repeat that?
I'm sorry.
You broke up the last 10 seconds or so. Can you repeat? There was a threat. What was that last part?
If you're a smuggler and you're going to be undercut by legal tea, I can see why that would upset you. You know, your money's built on smuggling, and yeah, sure. I get that. I understand. But is that worth a revolution? And then the third is, was there a realistic chance of success? There was not in 1776. Now, they didn't know that Sir William Howe was on their side.
Sure.
And they certainly didn't know that the French and the Spanish were going to come in. In fact, from their little mouths, the last thing they would have wanted is papist intervention in our free Protestant land.
Yeah.
What a horrible thing.
Yeah.
And see, they had to do a Linda Blair 180-degree turn, like in The Exorcist.
Yeah.
So what do I think of that, you ask? Not a lot.
Yeah.
But I'm biased.
No, that makes sense. And just so people know, I have, and we're definitely gonna we before we conclude, we want to get to the issue of patriotism and whatnot, because I firmly believe we can and should be patriots while acknowledging the issues. I know you do as well, and I don't think the prophets of Israel were anti-Semitic for criticizing Israel.
No,
so,
and the thing to bear in mind. Remember, I said way back at the beginning today that there were 4 and possibly 5 countries that came out of this.
Yeah.
There was ours. There was Anglo-Canada, because the Loyalist refugees that went up to Ontario, the Maritime provinces, the eastern townships of Quebec, they were the foundation of Anglo-Canada.
Yeah.
You know, in all of its, whatever it is. And they, from that experience, was developed a very unique kind of North American conservatism. I'd recommend people to you like George Grant and Death of a Nation. Lament for a Nation. There's a whole body of philosophy and work up there that comes directly from the Loyalist experience.
Hmm.
And of course, we're ignorant of it, but trust me, it's there.
Sure.
They went to sorry?
No, I was saying sure, yeah.
They went to the Bahamas and really established the Bahamas as a unique sort of situation. Interestingly enough, for those who are big South Florida fans, the descendants of those Loyalists are called conchs. And they settled the Keys, the Florida Keys, in the 1810s and 20s under the mistaken idea that they were more Bahamas. And then the U.S. Navy appeared and said, well, no, actually, you're not. This is part of Florida. Okay. So at any rate, if you ever go to Key West, that's another creation of the revolution.
Yeah.
Sierra Leone in Africa was a creation of the American Revolution. Because what happened was that in 1792, when slavery was abolished in Great Britain, and not in the empire, but in Britain itself, the former slaves there were given the option of going back to Africa if they wished. If they did, they went to a place called Freetown in Sierra Leone. So 10 years later, after the American Revolution, a lot of black loyalists who also had to leave, they're in Nova Scotia, and they decide they don't particularly like the weather.
Yeah.
And so they take advantage of the government offer to move to Sierra Leone.
Yeah.
So that's the fourth country. In a very real sense, though, Great Britain, as we know it, is also a creation of the revolution. Because it would have been a very different country had George III succeeded. And one of the interesting things, when you compare our methods of governance, in Britain, there's a dichotomy at every level between the ceremonial and the effective element of government.
Yeah.
The king, the prime minister, House of Lords, House of Commons, the Lord Lieutenant and the High Sheriff of the county versus the chairman of the county council.
Yeah.
The Lord Mayor, the Lord Provost, the Mayor of the Provost versus the chairman of the city or town council. Well, we got our start before that dichotomy existed. So we have an effective head of state. Our sheriffs are much more like the medieval sheriffs in terms of their powers, outside of New England where they abolished them, but the rest of the country, they're much more like the medieval sheriffs, even down to the posse, comitatus.
Yeah.
Remember the thing in the Old West, the posse?
Yeah.
That comes from medieval law, from medieval law.
Yeah.
Today, the sheriffs in the counties of England are purely ceremonial. Our sheriffs are they have the costumes. Ours have the actual power.
Yeah. Yeah.
They haven't called out a posse comitatus in England since 1832.
Wow.
Even now, the sheriff of your county, if he was chasing somebody, he could depute you right now.
Yeah.
Hand you a gun and say, come on, pal, we got to go get him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you might as well be the sheriff of Nottingham going after Robin Hood or somebody.
Yeah. So why do you think that happened in England? Why do you think it turned out so differently in the birthplace of these things?
The revolution.
In
the
what
American
way?
Revolution.
Yeah. Like how did it affect that?
In a certain... Well, what happened was that all of the different officials who were directly dependent upon the king were replaced by other officials who were dependent on either directly on Parliament and the government or on legislatures. Not legislatures, but the town and county councils. But another interesting thing happened at the same time. Just like the rest of medieval Europe, the medieval towns in England, Scotland, and Ireland, and they all kept roughly the same constitutions they'd had into the 1830s, were basically minor oligarchies. The Lord Mayor, the Lord Provost, or the Regent, or the Sovereign, whatever they called the top man of the town, they all varied. It was wildly different.
Oh, sorry, I think you broke up again. Sorry. Let me just review because it broke up for maybe 10 seconds or so. Sorry about that. You had said all the minor towns in England, Scotland were minor oligarchies, and then it cut out a bit. Sorry about that.
They were minor oligarchies They were run by the local guilds
Oh.
of craftsmen and merchants.
Sure.
And but they were also quite responsible in that you knew who to throw rocks at or who to suck up to.
Yeah.
But most people had no direct voice in governance. They just knew who really did the governing. And those people were very accessible. You know, if you had problems with them, as I say, you could suck up to them or throw rocks, or both.
Yep.
So, starting in the 1830s, they began a series of constitutional reforms intended to democratize local government, which have continued unrelentingly down almost to the present. They did succeed in breaking up the local oligarchies. They did succeed in making it open to everyone. All the while they were doing that, they were also removing power from the local scene and concentrating it in Whitehall. So now you have these city councils and town councils and county councils, but they're very limited in what they can do. And where this was brought to my attention, I have a godson, Indian fellow, who's a doctoral candidate at Cambridge in England. Not the real one in Massachusetts, the only one in England.
Yeah.
And he, I had just gone to see him and I was leaving. And he said, well, it's a good thing you're leaving because we're about to be shut down for 4 days. I said, what? Yeah, there's going to be a strike from the university and everything's going to be shut down. The university, the town, everything. I said, what? What do the mayor and the constabulary think about all that? They have no control over it.
Yeah.
The local MP is for it, so there's nothing to be done.
Wow.
Well, so that's, to answer your question, the oligarchy is not quite the same oligarchy that ruled in the 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th centuries. But oligarchies rarely stay the same. You know, they are constantly evolving like everything else. That's why, you know, the people, the elites of the United States in 1940 were very different from the elites of today.
Yeah.
But they're connections. I mean, they're not totally divorced from each other. But there's also been a lot of change. They're much more diverse, except that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
There are more Catholics at the table than there were in 1940. And it's meaningless.
Yeah.
There are more blacks. And the largest single cause of death amongst young black males is still of the young black males.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're having X percent of Harvard graduates black doesn't really do anything for you.
Yeah.
So, mutatis mutandis, oligarchies change, and yet in a sense they're the same because they continue to occupy the same functions. But what does make one ruling class different from another are two things. One is their state religion, their state church, what they believe. That makes a difference.
Yeah.
Because that brings us to number two, which is whether they're any good.
Yeah. Yeah. Just good rulers.
Yeah, there's good rulers and there's bad. And good rulers generally have something approaching a true faith. And with that, something approaching a real knowledge of how things work. The further from truth a rulership are, the worse they are.
So going back to the American Revolution then, again, help us analyze what you think of the Declaration's arguments. I mean, we could obviously, and I agree with you, when I was in high school, you know, fully evangelical, Protestant, patriotic American, I still consider myself a patriotic American, but definitely not evangelical or Protestant anymore. But even then, you know, we were studying the American Revolution in my AP U.S. history class with a great teacher, Christian lady. We're still friends to this day. She loves America, loves the founding fathers. And I said, even then, is that all we did this for? I mean, it didn't seem like the British government did everything perfectly, but I was like, this justified a revolution? Like, it just didn't make sense to me even then. So my skepticism about the American Revolution itself, it goes back to in high school when I was a red-blooded Protestant. So it's not a result of me being a Catholic convert now. So, so obviously I would agree with you. I'll tentatively agree with you that the revolution, according to Catholic principles, it was not justified. It's a very high bar to meet for any revolution, according to Catholic teaching. What about on English constitutional principles? Do you think the colonists had any argument there?
No, I don't at all. I mean, as I said earlier, for the dominant belief, even amongst oligarchs, was what's called virtual representation.
Yeah.
And that was the argument that they themselves used to justify the vast majority not being able to vote for the assemblies. I mean, again, you've got a man like Thomas Jefferson or Patrick Henry. They're members of the House of Burgesses. They're setting down, for most Virginians, what kind of taxes they're going to pay.
Yeah.
And most Virginian white men can't vote for them.
Mm.
So methinks the lady doth protest too much.
Yeah.
Now, I would recommend on this, of all people, Dr. Samuel Johnson and his pamphlet, which you can get online very easily, Taxation, No Tyranny.
Yeah.
Once you take away that argument, all you have are the force of events. The fighting did break out. And then they were declared to be in rebellion. And then it did happen.
Yeah.
But in terms of trying to justify it on theoretical grounds, forget it. But once they were traitors to the crown and their necks were at stake, well, then they had better win or not. As what's his face, Ben Franklin said, "Gentlemen, if we do not hang together, we shall assuredly hang separate."
Yeah.
Having said all of that, however, it doesn't mean that one doesn't necessarily have a certain admiration for some of the founding fathers. Washington, the architect of my people's ruin. Oh, sorry, did that come out like that? I mean, there are several ways you can look at it. The man who started the French Indian War, the man who broke his oath to the king, the first president of the United States. But, the most interesting judgment on him was cast by George III himself at the end of the Revolution. Washington was urged by his officers, because the Continental Congress had proved time and time again their incompetence. And they were good at proving it, so it wasn't hard for them. But his officers urged them to take power. And he refused. And he said, "No, I'm not going to. I'm going back to Mount Vernon. Have a nice day. Bye-bye." And he said, "Bade the officers farewell at Fraunces Tavern." Well, this news was brought to King George. And he said, "If this be true, then General Washington is the greatest man of the age."
Yeah.
So, it's not all one thing, not all the other.
Yeah.
Washington, of course, ended the Guy Fawkes Day celebrations in the Army, which was a good thing to do. There's some argument that he might have died a Catholic. One can only hope. Although even if he did, it doesn't mean everything he did was Catholic.
Well, just so people know on the Guy Fawkes thing, so I think some people won't know the context of that. Guy Fawkes Day from November 5th, early in the 1600s, and a Catholic attempt to blow up Parliament. And what they would, I've read the general orders were Washington, I'm just giving the standard, narrative. I actually don't know the detailed history on this. But they would burn effigies of the Pope to celebrate. And so Washington specifically mentions this and talks about how foolish it is, and he forbade it for the soldiers. So, and of course they were trying to get France at that point. Maybe we were allied with France at that point, but in any event, Washington tamped that down. So
he did. And,
not exactly in the spirit of the Declaration, I must say, but.
I always think of that movie V for Vendetta, which managed to try to make a hero out of Guy Fawkes without mentioning his religion.
Yes.
Which it would be like a film about Martin Luther King, leaving out the whole race issue. It's like, what?
Yeah.
Well, he was for freedom. What kind of? He was for freedom.
Yeah.
Okay, well.
Yeah.
So But all of this does leave us with a certain problem, and the certain problem is that most Americans of my vintage were brought up to conflate completely reverence for American institutions and a sort of Salvation history view of American history.
Yeah.
With patriotism.
Yes.
So if I were to tell you that I think the revolution is unjustified, was unjustified, it ended. Just like Queen Anne died, the revolution is also over. Just reassure people who are wondering. You must hate America. No, not at all. Quite the contrary. I served in the armed forces. I took the oath. Now, I look at it like this. Number one, God brings good out of evil. Number two, if my father had been illegitimate, which he wasn't, incidentally, my grandparents on both sides were married, just so you know. But if my father had been illegitimate, that would be unfortunate. I don't think my grandparents, spending a weekend together in the Poconos and Dad being the result and that being the end of it, that would not be a good thing.
Yeah.
And I would not say that probably what you should do is find yourself a chick and go to the Poconos. It was good enough for my grandparents. Why not you?
Yeah.
I would never do that. But he would not cease to be my father, regardless of his origins. Now, this country has existed for 250 years. I don't think much of the principles of the Founding Fathers. That's true. But I do think an awful lot of the country we have. This is the country that, whatever its failings, and God knows it has them, it's the country that my ancestors came to, some of them before, some of them after independence. It's a country that certainly I've done well in it. It's a country that God saw from all eternity to put me in. At the time, he decided to put me in. When I look at the flag, I don't think of some abstract symbol of freedom. I look at that red and I think of the many Americans who died for the country. I don't know what that freedom is supposed to be, especially not now.
Yeah.
Especially not under COVID. I don't know what that's supposed to be.
Yeah.
But I know the country itself is a real thing because I've been in every one of its states. It's a real entity that's misrun, but I don't know a country today that isn't. So I really don't.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the thing that really thrilled me about COVID. There's not a country on the planet, seemingly, that has a leadership with any brains to it. Maybe Hungary, and they voted Orban out. So at least Hungary doesn't have to be the odd man out anymore. They can be one with the other lemmings.
Yeah.
So the thing is that this country does not need any more self-justification than any other country.
Yeah.
Like all other countries, it's got a mixed history. It's got some real dodgy elements to it. Yeah, okay. And it's done some tremendous things. If you look at American culture, we haven't produced great art. We've produced good art. We've been masters of things to make life more pleasant. Entertainment, medicine, transportation. Certainly this technology we're using here. This is all the kind of thing Americans excel at. And I'm very happy about it. I'm very proud of that.
Yeah.
I may not be proud of the Founding Fathers, but I'm proud of vaudeville. I'm proud of the American songbook.
Yeah.
I'm proud of the golden age of Hollywood and the golden age of Broadway. We did that. And all the world imitates it. So I think part of the problem we have today, and I think this is where wokery has come from, is that the civic religion of America that was invented quite consciously in the early days by men like Noah Webster to take the place of the unity that the king brought. because now you've still got all the diversity, but you don't have a single organizing principle. Well, what do? You've got this. You do have a common moral consensus. Protestants, Catholics, Jews all think the same things are right and wrong, pretty much. And on top of that, you build the superstructure, the civil religion of the country, that again turns its history into salvation history, with the Puritan fathers, the Pilgrim fathers as the Old Testament, the founding fathers as the New, Washington, and to ascend in a degree, Lincoln as a sort of Christ figure, unless you remember the sort of Southern Shiites. If you're a Northerner, you're a Sunni. But if you're a Southerner, you're a Shiite, so you're venerating Jefferson Davis and Robert E. Lee. But in any case, these two versions of the national cult managed to coexist for a long time. And thankfully, because I'll tell you, that Civil War, we haven't even touched on that one.
I know.
And I'd recommend highly, by the way, a book by Kevin Phillips called The Cousins' Wars that looks at all of these conflicts from the Reformation down to our Second Civil War as a series of conflicts, and it's really worth reading. Anyway, so you have this cultus of the nation, and it provides us an organizing principle. It's the state church, basically. And it survives until the 60s. In the 60s, what happens is that moral consensus shatters. But that was the basis upon which the rest of it stood. So that collapses over the next 40 years. And then you're in this position where you have 2 or 3 different countries occupying the same space. But they're not based on geography, but ideology.
Yeah.
And then the problem, one of the things I didn't touch on, but it's worth thinking about, is that in New England, Calvinism in the late 18th, especially early 19th centuries, flipped and produced Unitarianism, which is also a big part of the American mind. Now, in a similar way, wokery is the flip side of American exceptionalism. Instead of being the last best hope of mankind, the shining city on the hill, it's the most horrible country that ever was.
Yeah.
Born in genocide and built on slavery. Well, no. It's the United States of America. Personally, I think its birthday would really be September of 1783, when the king absolved his American subjects of their allegiance. But I'm not going to quibble.
Yeah. But on the arguments of royal innovation there, I am curious of what you would think of that. I meant to ask you earlier, I want to say before I forget, curious what you think about Howe's answer about it being a political thing, why he didn't go after Washington. I'm curious your theory as to why he didn't do it, number one. And number two, you said you don't think there was a good constitutional argument within the English Constitution for the revolutionary cause. I just wanted you to explain that a little bit further, and maybe, what do you think of Edmund Burke's argument? Edmund Burke seemed to kind of understand where the Americans were coming from. So yeah, those two things. What was Howe really up to, or Howe, excuse me, and then this more constitutional argument and Edmund Burke perspective on the American Revolution.
All right, we'll start with Howe.
Sure.
Basically, Howe was a member of the Whig oligarchy. And he knew that a defeat in America would mean a defeat of the king and the king's friends in Britain.
Mm.
It's really that simple. And invoking parliamentary immunity was his version of taking the fifth.
Mm-hmm.
Because there was nothing he could say that would justify what he did, except treason. And treason is not a good excuse for anything.
So you think he didn't actually want to defeat Washington?
No, not at all.
Wow. Based on just behavior. Political sympathy?
Yeah.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Wow. That's an amazing thought.
I wish it were original, but it's not.
Yeah, and I haven't dived into it before, but I mean, if one of the main generals on the opposing side is actually kind of for you,
you've got something going there.
You do.
You got a problem.
Wow.
Well, I mean, you don't have a problem. His employers have a problem.
Yeah. Wow.
They'd originally wanted Clive to do the job, but he killed himself. So
dead man can't lead
kind of
armies.
removed himself from the running.
Yeah.
So he was out of the running. So with Howe, it's relatively simple. Burke, of course, was the best mouthpiece the Whigs had. And to understand him, in the immortal words of Samuel Johnson, he called him a bottomless Whig. And he was quite right. Now, you've also got to bear in mind, people fail to distinguish between the Burke of the 1770s and the Burke of the 1790s.
Yeah.
The Burke of the 1790s had his face rubbed in revolution. It
Responding to the French Revolution. Yeah.
Precisely. And that was a come-to-Jesus moment for Edmund Burke. Before, he was arguing on behalf of his faction. And the truth of the matter is that the colonial oligarchies that ran the assemblies were basically arguing for the same playbook as the Whig oligarchy. To what do you owe your mandate? Not the majority.
Yeah.
Well, because we're the best. Says who? Says who?
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, there was no answer for it. Burke had sympathy for the colonial assemblies because the Whig oligarchy were in the same position they were. If the king, even in the gutted version that George III was content with, if the king reassumed a chunk of the royal prerogative, their monopoly of power was over.
Yeah. Royal prerogative along the lines of Queen Anne, not even that far back.
Yeah, exactly.
So is it?
But it would mean.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Well, it would mean, had that happened, weirdly enough, the monarchy would have gone back to where it had been before, which was weirdly resembling the American presidency.
Yeah.
Today, a prime minister is basically the man who can get his bills through Parliament. He's got a majority.
Yeah.
Now, the head of state just takes that, whatever, and then gives the royal assent. The president, our president, is much more like a pre-1688 monarch.
Yeah.
In fact, much more so. He's become a lot more powerful. I like to say that we talk about their having absolute monarchy, but the truth is we have absolute democracy.
Yeah.
Good and hard.
Yeah.
And I also find it ironic that if the presidency, if you had a monarchy in this country with the king given the powers delineated to the president in the Constitution, I don't think people would let him go 1 inch beyond what he's given in the letter of the Constitution.
Yeah.
But because we elect them, we figure, oh, well, really, we're in power. So we let them do whatever they want.
Well, it really speaks to this. You tell me if you think this is an inapt comparison, but it makes me think of the transition from the Roman Republic to the Empire, where it's like the Romans are supposedly so much against kings and monarchs, right? They threw out Tarquin Superbus, if I'm remembering him correctly. And they pride themselves on not being monarchists. But then slowly but surely, the princeps becomes far more powerful than the monarchs ever were. But he just is not called a monarch. And so they accept it. Yeah. And so it's again, this, I mean, Augustus was not trying to overthrow the Republic, at least with his words and his actions. He was in every way trying to maintain the veneer, the accidents, while the underlying substance is changed. It's like sort of political transubstantiation, I may experiment with this idea a bit more, Charles. I mean, of political transubstantiation. But do you think that's an apt comparison?
I do actually, and it's interesting too that in Canada, that part of the royal ceremonial, the parliamentary ceremonial, is the King's state opening of Parliament, or in Canada, Australia, places where they've got viceroys for the King. The Governor General, or on the provincial level in Canada, the Lieutenant Governor, state level in Australia, the Governor. they all open Parliament with all of this pomp and so on. They give the speech from the throne,
Yeah.
which, of course, is written by the Prime Minister or the Premier, even though the individual giving the speech will talk about my government.
Yes.
Well, but
same in the UK. Yep.
Yeah, precisely the same. And, it all sounds extremely impressive. Where was I going with this? Boy, there was a point to it. It's fast eluding me.
I was mentioning about Augustus and the Roman Republic to the Empire that,
right.
We're anti-monarchists.
Earlier I mentioned...
Yeah, then we get an emperor.
Earlier I mentioned that the Catholic mind can't take that.
Yes.
That's sort of... We reserve transubstantiation to religion, not politics. So in Quebec, in 1968, up until 1968, Quebec had a very standard, except that they had two houses, which by that time they were the last province in Canada to have a bicameral legislature. The Assemblée législative and the Conseil législatif, the Legislative Assembly, Legislative Council. But they went through all of the beautiful ritual, only in French, that they do in the other provinces and in Ottawa. Well, in 1968, they abolished the upper chamber. Now remember, this is during the Quiet Revolution, when they're getting rid of the church, they're getting rid of the faith. They also got rid of the monarchy. In terms of spirit, in terms of the heart. That was when the Révolution Tranquille, the Quiet Revolution, when we turned from being ourselves to becoming Yankees who speak English. And I mean that exactly how it sounds.
Yeah.
Anyway, with the flag of my ancestors over my head, yelling at me.
Yeah.
Anyway, so what happened was they get rid of the Legislative Council, which, of course, by that time was, purely ceremonial, really. They renamed the Legislative Assembly the National Assembly, the Assemblée Nationale. They get rid of all of the ceremonial surrounding the state opening. They get rid of it all. And the interesting thing is, and this, again, you'd have to be French-Canadian, you'd have to be Catholic. In the history of the Parliament, where I was reading about this in French, they refer to that ceremonial as la liturgie parlementaire, the parliamentary liturgy, which it was. And they no longer believed in it. So they had to get rid of it.
Yeah.
And stream it down to the garbage they do now.
Yeah.
The current government of Quebec finally took the crucifix off the speaker's chair.
Wow.
And have gotten, well, they should.
Yeah, they should.
They should.
They should.
I mean, considering what utter garbage they are.
I'm so shocked it lasted that long.
Well, it was the scumbag who's currently Premier of Quebec actually campaigned on keeping it. But when you're a pile of garbage, you tend to be a little elastic in those things. And he's gotten rid of the crowns from all of the coats of arms. So, he's a big piece of garbage, but at least he's the top garbage man.
Yeah. Well, as Ben Franklin himself said, in a corrupt governments are like rivers. The lightest wood floats to the top. I think that was
it sure does.
From Poor Richard's Almanac.
It sure does.
I remember that line. Right. I thought it was so good.
Well, one of the things that makes me giggle uncontrollably about modernity, that people like Thomas Aquinas and Aristotle said there were three good kinds of government and there are three evil shadows.
Yeah.
There was monarchy versus tyranny, aristocracy, a group, versus oligarchy, what they call polity, which is basically government by the majority of the stakeholders, landowners, veterans, etc., versus what they call democracy, mob rule. And the difference between the three, of course, being the one ruled for the common good, the other against it for themselves. Well, they then went on to say that the best government is a mixed government of the three good types.
Yeah.
But what we've done, and none of those guys ever came up with it, and we've done it.
Yeah.
A mixed government of the three evil kinds.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
They didn't even talk about it. They didn't even mention it. And we've put it into practice. Gosh, I'm proud.
That'd be worth reflecting on in another episode if we do that. I want to go back to your comment about the woke, because I'm certainly not woke. I mean, when people ask me, what kind of conservative are you, I half jokingly say medieval. So, and so I'm not a woke guy at all. But let's give the devil his due. I'd be curious what you think. I think what's so interesting about the American Revolution and all of our history since, I think this flows into like the messianic identity that it seems so common throughout American history as well. I'd really like your thoughts on this. I know we're getting to close to 3 hours here, so we can start wrapping things up. And I really appreciate your generous time. And I hope we can have you on again. But to give the devil his due, I mean, everything that you're talking about, that we're discussing, seems to be acknowledging that there is rhetoric and there is reality. There is highfalutin ideals, and there is the grubby reality where it's way more tarnished, it's way more practical, it's way more self-interested. And not that there's not a mix, like with Washington. I thought that was a great example of there is a mixture here.
Yeah.
That he's like denying his oath to the king, but then he's denying power to himself. So that's an interesting, complex human story, right? But I think what's been so hard for our country, and I think it's kind of reaching a very interesting point right now. Again, not to like lapse into political commentary, but I think there are many on the right now, like myself. I was just talking with a very good friend of mine who's Gen Z, So he's predictably he's toying with a few things I'm not particularly comfortable with, particularly on racial issues. But I also am where many of them are as well in terms of things like re-examining modern pretensions and whatnot. But I was explaining to him, I was in 8th grade on 9/11 because he had just had a birthday. I was wishing him happy birthday. I was like, what year was it? And he said 2001. I was like, so you were alive on 9/11. And he said, you are like, so all the millennials I know, you always say when I was born in reference to 9/11. I was like, and then I explained to him, I was like, that's a fair comment, but I'll tell you, it was a truly life-changing, cathartic moment for those of us who lived through it. I was old enough to be young and old enough to remember because I was in 8th grade.
Sure.
And so 9/11 plus the Iraq War, one other thing, I said to him before I get to that, I said to him, things really did, I don't know if you were in the country at the time, but I remember things changing for maybe 3 to 6 months. Everybody was so much nicer. Everybody was going to church. Like it was unlike anything I've ever experienced before or since. Was that your experience?
Or since, yeah. Yeah, I was, not only was I in the country, I was a mile and a half from the Pentagon when it was hit.
Wow.
So,
wow.
Go
ahead. Sorry.
I actually had a group of seminarians that I was going to give a tour of Washington to.
Oh, wow.
And we were supposed to take a tour of the Capitol building. Now, the priest that was with us that morning had overslept. So a friend of mine had set up it was a congressional aide, had set up the tour, right? So Father oversleeps. You don't want to be late for a tour of Congress.
Yeah.
We didn't know anything about what had happened in New York. We didn't know a thing. So we get on the road, and suddenly traffic begins slowing. And then it was up. And it felt like the bus had been rear-ended.
Wow.
And I look around and traffic stops, and over the horizon, there was like a pillar of flame and smoke.
Wow.
As I say, we're a mile and a half south of the Pentagon. And so I told the driver, I said, turn on the radio. I'll never forget the first words I heard. The FAA have ordered all unauthorized flights over the United States airspace shut down.
Yeah.
Like, are we being invaded? But by whom?
Yeah.
Is this the War of the Worlds?
Yeah.
Mars attacks.
Yeah.
What could it be? Because remember, this is 2001. We don't have any enemies.
Yeah.
It's not the Soviets. There are no more Soviets. Not the Russians. They wouldn't do anything like that.
Yeah.
It was so.
China wasn't where it is now.
No, we had no enemies of that sort. So, at first we saw various emergency vehicles going by that you would see normally, and then big things like mobile command posts and so forth I'd never seen before. And then eventually we found out what the story was, and they they pushed us off the freeway and we went back. I gave a very different lecture from the one I was going to give.
Yeah.
But at any rate, to answer the question, I was very much in the country at the time.
Yeah.
And for that week, we went back to the 1940s because there was no air travel.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
we had to make the priest and I had to decide whether or not to continue the tour, go back to Minnesota. And I told him, I said, let's see what we can see.
Yeah.
Obviously, we can't see downtown Washington. And there were a lot of things we were still able to show them, so it worked out. And then by the time we got back, I spent a couple of days recuperating, and then they were flying again, so I went back to LA.
Yeah.
But at any rate, you're right. The flags were everywhere. I remember in the LA Times, people were wondering, I'm a person of the left. I don't know if I feel comfortable waving flags, but everyone did.
Yeah.
And I still have the same landlord. He was a Sikh gentleman. So I told him, I said, if you have any trouble at all, just let me know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
typical stupid people, and you remember, the stupid are always the winners. Stupiditas omnia vinci. So you had in LA, in the week following 9/11, you had reprisal attacks on Coptic Christians, on Sikhs, anybody but Muslims. Somehow none of them would touch.
Wow.
But they attacked all these quote unquote swarthy Middle Easterners who had nothing to do with anything.
Yeah.
But the stupid do this.
Yeah.
Always remember the stupid. They're very important. They never get their due in history.
Yeah.
It was von Kuhnert Ledeen, Eric von Kuhnert Ledeen, who had a very important insight, I think. Most historians will admit that history has catastrophe, the things that happen for reasons we human beings have no control over. And then there is conspiracy. Things are plotted and planned. What makes one more of a catastrophist or a conspiracy theorist is the proportions. And then, of course, how much of the one, how much of the other to any given historic issue, that's a matter for debate. But von Kuhnert Ledeen pointed out the third element that people never, ever give its due: stupidity.
Stupidity, yeah.
Stupidity.
It's a fair point.
Human stupidity.
Yeah.
It's so important. And remember what stupidity is. It's the marriage of arrogance and ignorance. That's what it is to be stupid.
Yeah.
You don't know? You don't need to know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, yeah, you're right. You don't need to know. You're such a wonderful person.
Sure. So the reason I was mentioning this to my Gen Z friend was because I was saying how this led up to Iraq, and how everybody now basically acknowledges that was a catastrophe. We went in under false pretenses. I was a teenager, so I believe, coming from a Reaganite household, which, there's still things from that I think are fine. But I've reevaluated many aspects of it. But, believed in President Bush. And anyway, it turned out to be a catastrophe, a disaster, not only for us, but even more importantly, in many ways, for those in the Middle East, including our Catholic brethren. And it continues to affect the migration crisis in Europe. So anyway, that this has fundamentally brought many people to where they are today, like of my generation who lived through this. Yours did too, but obviously, like as a coming of age thing for me, where we're as I often say, I love our country, I hate its empire. And I think many people my age feel that way. I think many Gen Z people feel that way, but they didn't live through that transition. So I was explaining to him why we always bring up 9/11. It actually seemed to make sense to him. So all that to say, to get back to the woke point, because I think that 9/11 to Iraq War illustrated this exact and the fallout after it exhibits this exact problem that because we were always driven by a grand narrative from the very, very beginning. There is this need, I think, on occasion to evaluate how far we have fallen from the height of our rhetoric. You know what I mean? I remember reading a letter from Patrick Henry. Somebody was raising the slavery issue with him. I mean, of course, give me liberty or give me death. And he's a Christian man, avowedly Christian man, and he's talking about the issue of slavery in one of these letters. And he frankly admits, he says it's an evil, it should go away. But I can't bring myself to part from the convenience of it, something to that effect. And I remember that and being just floored by it when I was younger. And so I guess to give the woke their due, I think part of what they're doing, and I don't agree with all their points, of course, because, slavery is a universal institution, blah, 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 blah. I would agree with a lot of your criticisms, but I do think the valuable thing they're doing is evaluating this chasm on occasion between rhetoric and reality. And I think that's what a lot of Americans right now, myself included, are still processing post 9/11, post Iraq, post COVID. And not to get too much into contemporary events, but, I think we just went through what may be America's Suez crisis, potentially, with Iran. So it's like we're going through this analysis and recalibration in light of the chasm between our rhetoric and our reality. And like, we're for freedom and for liberty and human rights and all these things. And then realizing, no, it's a lot more sordid than that. So anyway, I want to get your thoughts on that, perhaps as a closing of our reflections on the 250th. And this has been wonderful. I feel like we could go on for much longer, but I'm curious what you think of that aspect of things.
Well, I think there's a certain amount of truth to it. I mean, the problem with wokery is that it's so often the problem with the left. They see the problem. It's just their cure is worse than the disease.
Yeah, totally agree.
You've got a stomach ache. Try this arsenic; it'll fix you. It will.
Yeah.
Too bad you won't have the problem anymore.
Sure.
But the truth is, and I try to do this, not that I'll make a plug, but in my Puritan's empire, I try to point out that we have traditionally, in our foreign policy, always actuated this stuff. From the moment we were able to affect Latin America, i.e. starting in the 1820s, we always backed the anti-clerical side on any given issue, always, without a single exception. When we got big enough to become a world power, we took on Spain. A more unjust war than the Spanish-American War I can't think of. Then World War I, which, what were we doing in there? Number one. Number two, once we're in, what do we do? Well, in the immortal words of that German apologist and propagandist Winston Churchill, had we not gotten rid of the Habsburgs and Hohenzollerns and Wittelsbachs and the rest under American insistence, the Hitlerite monster would never have crawled out of his sewer. You can leave that. You can put that directly to Woodrow Wilson, who, however, was acting in concert with the principles that American foreign policy has always had. The World War II, you think of Yalta, you think of the way we greased the skids for Umberto II in Italy. You look at how we dealt with the kings of the Near East and getting them out. That's been the gift that's kept on giving. Farouk in Egypt, Faisal in Iraq.
Yeah.
Latterly, the Shah. You're greasing the skids for the Shah. You talk about the gift that has really kept on giving.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the day that we lost the Afghanistan war was the day that Mr. Bush Jr.'s personal envoy informed the Loya Jirga on Afghan national television that they were not going to restore their king, after they said they were going to do it. How could the average Afghan think of the Barzai regime as anything but a puppet state after that? We never learn. We never pick up on this stuff. We never. And I tell foreigners, I tell them, if you want to love my country, you want to come over to the United States and take a road trip, a long one, anywhere you want to go, San Diego to Jacksonville, Minneapolis to New Orleans, Seattle to Portland, Maine, anywhere you like. I don't care. You will come away convinced that you're in the most wonderful country on earth with the most wonderful people. If you want to think that we're an absolute tool of the devil incarnate, study the history of our foreign policy. Now, there's a reason for this dichotomy, and the reason for that dichotomy goes back to the rulers and the ruled. Now, there's not a rigid distinction in some ways in any society between the two. The two always influence each other. It's always a symbiotic relationship.
Yeah.
It's not one way. So the rulership are influenced by their subjects, and the subjects are influenced by their masters. It's always that way. And we have our master's morality. We picked it up.
Yeah.
We absorbed it. That's really what the 60s was about. The masters themselves were getting corrupt as early as the teens, when you got Teddy Roosevelt fighting birth control amongst the WASPs. Everything he said was true. They didn't care, of course, because, satisfying my immediate desires is so much more fun than having any thought to what might come past me.
Yeah.
Except that we're the people who came past, and we're the ones stuck with the bill.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, he was certainly right in that contraception destroyed his class. Mind you, they made up their numbers in other ways, but that's how you get a quiet, peaceful change in oligarchy. Harvard is no longer a WASP institution, but it still turns out pseudo-WASPs.
Yeah.
Of all religions and none, of all ethnicities and none. So,
yeah.
And where does this bring us in 250 years? Well, I have to say that all of that having been said, bearing in mind the mistakes of the Forever War, which was like starting with it and then getting out of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was joking at the time when about the time Kabul fell, Pope Francis put through trash can custodians, and sorry, traditionis custodians, my mistake. And I thought, isn't this funny? These two old men are trying to make me relive my high school years.
Yeah. Yeah.
The fall of Saigon and the kibosh on the Tridentine Mass.
Yeah.
It was like being a teenager again.
Wow.
Isn't that great?
Wow.
Nostalgia. Yeah. But seriously, all that being said, I remember 50 years ago when we had the bicentennial. Now, mind you, we were just coming off the Vietnam War. We were just coming through the tumult of the 60s, which we didn't realize that perhaps was being institutionalized at that time.
Yeah.
Nevertheless. And
just come out of Watergate, if I recall correctly.
Right. Watergate had just ended, and that was a real long national nightmare. We had three to choose from.
Yeah.
Watergate, the war, and the general tumult. But it looked as though they were all over, and we might be heading back towards sanity. And the bicentennial was a chance to try to regain some kind of sanity, some sort of something. That was the hope. And it was wonderful in a lot of ways. And mind you, my views, to be brutally frank, weren't much different then than they are now.
Yeah.
But it didn't matter because it was, an affirmation of the country is the way I looked at it. I love the 4th of July, I could do without the Declaration attacking my people. Thanks very much.
Yeah.
But I love the fireworks and I love the celebration of the country itself.
Yeah.
So
same.
It's very disappointing to see how uninterested most of the country is now in the 250. And there are reasons for that. I mean, half the country, because it is, of course, sponsored by the president that is, half the country are not interested. And if President Biden or President Harris were at the helm, the other half wouldn't be interested.
Sure.
Which also goes to show you how the civil religion of the country has died. I mean, I remember when President Trump made his Mount Rushmore speech in January of 2020.
Yeah.
And his supporters were going wild. He's come down from the mount with the tablets. His opponents were going wild. Oh, evil, horrible, yellow man, orange man, whatever it is. What caught me about it was that the speech itself was boilerplate.
Yeah.
That any politician of either party could have said when I was a boy.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we've come from. Now, how do we get out of it? Well, I don't know. We will get out of it. We sure will, because nothing stays in history, nothing stays the same. I think, I mean, if I were a betting man, and I'm not, if I were, I'd say we'll probably end up with a strong man of some kind.
Yeah.
I'd rather it were Franco than Cromwell, but that's just me. But there will be a solution, you know, and in the meantime, people simply have to keep doing their duty as they know it to be, you know, and it's got to be, you might say, in concentric circles outward.
Yeah.
First, you've got to be the kind of man, or woman if you're a woman, that you think every man should be. That's the first step. And then you deal with your family, your friends, and so on, depending upon what position in society you already occupy. You do your very best from where you are. That's all you can do. That's all anybody has ever been able to do.
Yeah.
And things will change. You know, if with 2020 hindsight, you know, you look at World War I, 1914, the peace parties, of course, in every country in Europe were dead set against going to war because they didn't think it was a smart idea. The war parties, in a way, they're more interesting. They saw war as a quick way out of the internal divisions that each European country had.
Yeah.
And everybody waving the flag, we'll all be together, it'll be wonderful. The problem was, their idea of war was the Napoleonic Wars. If they had looked at our Second Civil War more closely, with its submarines and its aerial bombardments and its trench warfare and its machine guns, and then kind of what-ifed with 50 years of technology, they might have had a clearer notion of what they were really going to let themselves in for.
Yeah.
But nobody usually has, I mean, very few of us in our private lives, and so very few in our public lives, have that kind of insight. We do the best with what we think we can. And I hate to quote Vladimir Lenin, but as he said, there are decades where nothing happens and hours where decades happen.
Yeah.
And that, I'm afraid we shall see repeated, as every generation has, the truth of that statement. So work and pray and work.
Yeah.
Know? Do the best you can.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a great movie I saw a while ago. Maybe you saw it, A Hidden Life, and it was about Franz Jägerstätter, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Did you see that movie?
Jägerstätter. Not yet.
Oh, it's a great movie.
I know.
Yeah. Well, the reason I mention it. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
No. The reason I mention is the premise is that Jägerstätter had refused obedience. You know, he refused to take the oath of loyalty to Hitler. Realized what the Nazis were about, etc. And a lot of people were making arguments to him that were consequentialist, sort of, well, if you do this, nothing is going to change. I mean, it's not going to stop the war. It's not going to do, you'll just lose your family, etc., etc. But he knew that wasn't relevant to the issue of conscience. What was relevant was what was right and what was wrong, and whether he would follow what was right. And he did, and he was murdered for it by the Nazis. Yeah. But the whole premise of the movie, I'm forgetting the line at the end of it, is this beautiful, beautiful, and it's kind of a gut-wrenching movie. It's kind of slow moving, but you feel the agony of the situation in its slow movingness and its glacial speed. But the whole premise of the movie is that it is the hidden life of most people, the day in, day out duties. Of family, of church, of school, of friendship that keeps the evil at bay. And I just think we're in a time when more of us really need to recapture that. And, I say this ironically as we're posting on the internet, and there's good ways in which the internet can be used, But more and more of my life, particularly since COVID, I just feel this strong conviction that it needs to be less and less virtual, which fortunately wasn't too virtual before all of that. But even it just doesn't matter. Like, what are my duties right in front of me, to my family, to my friends, to my parish, to my fellow Catholics, to my countrymen, etc. because so much time and energy is wasted in this virtual world. And so those just to, play off your point, that's what I'm thinking a lot of in the 250th, because quite honestly, I've rarely seen this much despair among a lot of people about the situation of the country for different reasons and whatnot. And truth be told, I'm a happy warrior. Like I temporally speaking, I do think it's a hopeless situation. I don't expect anything like the sunniness and optimism we generally had as a society when I was growing up. I don't expect that in my lifetime.
Yeah.
I don't think that will come back.
No.
But my sunniness and optimism, just as I know yours, which is why you're a happy warrior too, is because whether we acknowledge it or not, we're all monarchists, because Jesus is the king and he's on his throne, and that will never change. And so I find my joy and contentment in him, and I've got 1,001 ways to grow in that. But that's just, anyway, those are my thoughts based on what you said. So
we could always be more loyal to him.
Yeah.
There are always new ways. And two, when I was a young man, when I was in college, my first college was New Mexico Military Institute, which was the military junior college. It was 1978 to 80. And we all thought we would never see 30 years old. We thought we were going to die fighting the Soviets in the Fulda Gap. Absolutely sure of that. There wasn't even a question. Then 2 years in downstate Northridge, which was, I majored in frat life and minored in poli-sci. And I like to say it was like daycare with booze, but but it was kind of obvious by that time, after a few years, that's what it was.
I was an RA in the dorms in college. I know.
Oh,
yeah. I had to do a lot of adult babysitting in those days.
One of my best friends at Nemi went to USC. I went to Northridge, but there was a bar then is now near USC called the Nino, and we had a German bartender named Gunter, I think his name was. I could be wrong. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Whatever his name was, he was German, and we pioneered what we called the 5 Zombie Club. Now, the rule was you had to be able to drink 5 zombies at one sitting and then get up and do the rest of the day normally. And if you couldn't do that, you couldn't join the 5 Zombie Club. So I'm happy to say that Matt and I lived up to its rules, and some did, many couldn't. We were proud of ourselves in those days. It was a different frame of reference.
Sure.
But of course, this was under Reagan. So the horror of the Carter years, where I was sure that I was a walking dead man, gave way to this period of restoration, in a sense. It felt like it. Under Reagan, it felt like we had come back to some kind of sanity.
Yeah.
And the Soviets were afraid of us. I was in the National Guard, and I was quite happy to think that I wouldn't be dying in the Fulda Gap. Of course, this was long before the Forever War, so our joke in the Guard was, "Sleep well, America. Your National Guard does."
Yeah.
But all of that, unfortunately, those sorts of jokes, went the way of the passenger pigeon. But that was one period, and so it went until the fall of the wall. And I got to tell you, I lived to see the great Satan go down. I lived to see the fall of the Iron Curtain. The place I'm at now, it wouldn't be possible unless that had happened. Our chief chaplain is Byzantine Catholic. Born in, he and his wife have 9 kids. So you see, they are living up to the church's teaching. And I love the kids. They're like another set of nephews and nieces. But she's American. He's Slovakian. If it hadn't been for the fall of the wall, they would not exist.
Yeah.
Not as a couple, anyway. And when they were born, the idea that this kid from Slovakia would marry a girl from Colorado, are you out of your ever-loving mind?
Yeah.
But I saw that. I saw the fall of the wall. And all the dreck that's happened since then, I'm glad. that I've saw that.
Hmm.
Because sometimes it isn't bad. Sometimes the dreck doesn't win. It's rare that it doesn't have a comeback. As Tolkien tells us, the shadow will always return.
Yeah.
Always. But man, it's good to see the Dark Tower fall. And my biggest hope for the young people today is that somehow, some way, they'll see a Dark Tower fall. There's nothing like it.
Mm.
Nothing like it. It makes all the garbage that went before worth it.
Yeah.
And it makes all the dreck that'll follow worth it. To have seen the Dark Tower fall.
Well, I think that's a great way to end, and we'll pray for that. We'll pray for that. There's certainly many dark towers that one would hope would fall, and we'll pray for that. And I think it's good for all of us, as you so often do in your work. It's one of the reasons why I appreciate your work so much. You always emphasize that we need to first take care of the dark tower within ourselves, and
it's there.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I mean, not me, of course, but I'm sure everyone else.
Sure. But no,
self-delusion is the key to positive thinking.
Yes, yeah. But no, the striking down of the barred doors in our own souls with the help of God's grace. So I think it's a great place to end. And I don't think this is a downer episode. I think it's a sober episode with room for hope. And I think that was a good ending on your part. Did you have any final thoughts? I mean, I think it's a pretty darn good place to end, but did you have any final thing you wanted to say as we reflect this week on the 250th?
Yes, go out and celebrate.
Yeah.
For heaven's sake. Light up those fireworks or go see a fireworks display.
Have some fun.
Do a barbecue. Watch a parade. Have a good time.
Yep. Have a good time.
You're in a country where you can. You know, and one other thing I think we do need to remember. At the moment, we're not starving en masse.
Yep.
You know, there's still a need for anti-obesity ads. When the day ever comes that we don't have to worry about that, that's when you really need to get upset. But until that day, right now, yeah, things are harder than they've been within the past few decades, but man, they could be so much worse.
Yeah.
And my late father used to say, never worry about what you don't have. Learn to enjoy what you've got.
Mm. Sage advice, sage wisdom. Never worry about what you don't have. Care about what you have.
Enjoy.
What was that? What was that?
Learn to enjoy what you have.
Learn to enjoy what you have. Yeah. No, that's good. That's good. Well, thank you, sir, for your very, very generous time. This is more than we talked about initially, so it's very, very kind of you. Would love to have you on again for perhaps a more focused discussion. Thank you for this. This very no. I don't mean that as a criticism. This was great. Just this broad. I mean, we're dealing with a big anniversary, so you had to have a big telling of stories and facts and all that kind of stuff. So, but thank you very much, Charles, for coming on. And we'll close with our normal anthem verse, like we always do. Psalm 73, verses 25 through 26. Who have I in heaven but you? And on earth I desire nothing besides you. My flesh and my heart may fail, but the Lord is the strength of my heart and my portion forever.